You're listening to the Alpha's love stories, romantic audiobooks that will make your heart race. Don't forget to subscribe for more enchanting love tales. Chapter 1: The Deluge. The rain, it had been falling for 3 days straight. Not a gentle sprinkle, but a relentless, angry deluge that hammered the earth until the very roads gave up their form. They became rivers of thick, sucking mud, hungry rivers that swallowed wagon wheels whole and didn't spit them back out. Inside the lurching carriage, I pressed my forehead against the cold, trembling glass. The world outside was a watercolor painting left in the storm, all blurred grays and despairing browns. Every rut, every hidden hole in the drowned road jolted through the wooden frame and straight into my bones. My fingers, pale and trembling, twisted themselves into the worn fabric of my cloak, a nervous habit, a silent plea for steadiness I never truly felt. Across from me, my companion Leora let out a shaky breath. "We never should have left the last town," she whispered, her face a ghostly oval in the gloom. The storm warnings, they were carved into the sky itself. I didn't answer her. What was there to say? When the Royal Healers Guild in the capital summons you, you go. Even when you are just two junior apprentices from a forgotten eastern province, even when the sky is falling, the Alpha King's court does not accept weather as an excuse. The carriage gave a sudden, violent shudder, tilting so far to the left I was thrown against the wall. My heart became a frantic bird, beating its wings against the cage of my ribs. I clutched the leather-hanging strap until my knuckles turned white. Through the rain-streaked window, my blood ran cold. We were on the old stone bridge, Serpent's Gorge Bridge. I hated it even on the sunniest day. Below us, the river was no longer water. It was a churning, roaring monster, swollen, brown, and furious, dragging broken trees and the remnants of flooded homes in its foaming jaws. "This isn't right," I breathed the words to myself, a secret confession of dread. The world answered me, not with words, with sound, a crack, sharp, final, not thunder from the heavens but from the ancient stones beneath us. The bridge was breaking. The carriage screamed as it lurched, then tipped. Leora crashed into me. We became a tangle of limbs, of wool and fear. The driver's cry was cut short. The horses shrieked a sound of pure animal terror. And then we were falling. Not flying, but scraping, grinding, shrieking against the unyielding stone. My shoulder slammed into the door. The taste of iron, my own blood, or just raw fear filled my mouth. Then came the impact. A bone-jarring crash that stole the air from my lungs, and immediately after, the cold. A shocking, violent explosion of water through the seams of the door. It was so cold it burned. The carriage was submerged. We were trapped in a wooden coffin at the bottom of a gorge. The door, Leora screamed, her voice high with panic. She clawed at the handle, now above our heads as the carriage settled on its side. "It's jammed, Alara, it won't move." Water poured in. It was at my waist now, climbing with a terrifying, indifferent speed. It soaked through my dress, heavy, pulling me down. My lungs began to ache for air we didn't have. I kicked at the window, but the thick, expensive glass only mocked my desperation. Then a new sound, a deeper, more resonant crash that vibrated through the water. Another impact. Leora pointed, her finger trembling. Through the murky, distorted glass of our opposite window, I saw it. Another carriage, larger, infinitely more ornate, painted in the deep crimson and brilliant gold of the royal house. My healer's instinct fired before my mind could protest. There was someone in there, someone needed help. "We have to get out first," Leora cried, grabbing my arm, but I was already moving, pushing through the icy water toward the upper door. The water gave me a terrible buoyancy. My fingers, numb and slippery, fumbled for the handle and found it. I prayed to any god who might be listening and pulled. With a groan of protest, it opened. Sweet, rain-filled air hit my face as I dragged myself through the opening, the current immediately trying to claim me. I clung to the overturned hull of our carriage, splinters digging into my palms. Leora surfaced beside me, gasping and retching. "Swim to the bank by the bridge pillar," I shouted, pointing to a stone outcrop. Ilara, what are you doing? Her eyes were wide pools of terror. The royal carriage, there's someone inside. You'll die, it's sinking. She was right. I could see the grand vehicle tilting, its heavier frame succumbing to the pull of the deepest current. It was madness, a death sentence. But a face flashed in my mind, not the king's from his portraits, but the imagined face of whoever was trapped inside. A person, just a person, I didn't think. I pushed away from the safety of my own wreckage and let the furious current carry me toward the crimson and gold. The cold was 1,000 knives, my waterlogged dress wrapped around my legs like chains. I fought, my arms burning, my kicks growing weaker. My fingers brushed something, caught it, the gilded edge of a door handle on the royal carriage. I held on, pulling myself to the window and pressed my face to the glass. My heart simply stopped. Inside, slumped against the velvet-lined wall, was a man. Even through the watery distortion, I knew him. Kalen Thorne, the Alpha King, unconscious. A dark, ominous bruise blooming across his temple, and the water inside, it was already at his chest, rising to meet his chin. The carriage groaned, sinking another few inches. I had moments, perhaps less. The door was impossible against the water's pressure. I looked around wildly, my gaze landing on a piece of shattered bridge railing, a jagged stone still attached. I grabbed it, my hands slipping on the wet rock. With a cry that was part effort, part pure terror, I slammed it against the window. Once, twice. On the third blow, a spiderweb of cracks appeared. On the fourth, the glass shattered inward. The river rushed into the new opening with a vengeance, almost tearing me away. I held on, shoved my head and shoulders through the broken pane, glass tearing at my skin. Your Majesty, my voice was a stranger's, thin, desperate. Your Majesty, please. Nothing, no movement, just the relentless rise of the water. I squeezed through the window, ignoring the fresh stings of pain, and crawled toward him through the submerged interior. Up close, he was immense. A mountain of a man, easily over 200 pounds of pure, solid authority rendered helpless. His formal jacket was torn, revealing the powerful build beneath, now limp and heavy. Please, I whispered, my fingers going to his throat, searching for a pulse beneath the cold skin. There, faint but there, a flutter against my fingertips. Please wake up. His eyes remained closed. Getting him out was a physical impossibility. I was a wisp of a girl, all sinew and bone from years of humble living and hard study. He was a king carved from marble and muscle. The water was rising over my own shoulders now. The carriage shuddered, beginning its final descent. I grabbed him under his arms anyway. The first pull moved him barely an inch. My shoulders screamed in protest. I planted my feet against the ornate wall, tears of effort and despair mixing with the river on my cheeks, and pulled again. Move, I grunted. Come on, move. A quiet, logical voice in my head, the voice of my training, spoke clearly. Let go, save yourself, this is not your responsibility. I was Ilara Vane, no family name of consequence. A life of quiet service awaited me if I survived. His life was the kingdom. I pulled harder. His body slid a fraction more. The carriage tilted violently. We were out of time. With a sob of pure strain, I dragged his head and shoulders toward the broken window. Glass scraped against his back, against my arms. I didn't know whose blood I saw clouding the water. The carriage was filling. I was under water now, working blind, my lungs burning. One more pull, one more impossible demand of my breaking body. I didn't have it, but I found it anyway. With a final, wordless scream that bubbled into the water, I heaved. His torso came free of the window just as the carriage rolled completely over, the golden crest disappearing into the brown depths. The current snatched us, spinning us in a violent dance. My grip on him faltered, no. My hand lunged, caught the sodden fabric of his shirt, held on with the last of my will. My head broke the surface. I dragged in a ragged, burning breath and began to kick, my arm locked around his chest, fighting for every inch toward the bank where Leora and others now stood, shouting, reaching out. The bank was 1,000 miles away. My legs were laid. My mind was a gray fog of cold and exhaustion, but I saw the hands, reaching, grabbing. They pulled us from the river's grip, hauling the king's massive, lifeless form onto the mud, then turning to pull me up after him. I collapsed beside him, vomiting river water, my body shaking so violently I thought my bones would crack. She saved him, someone breathed, their voice hushed with awe. The girl, she actually pulled him out. Get the healer and someone get a blanket over her. I tried to push myself up to see if his chest was moving, to see if the impossible had meant anything, but the gray fog swallowed the world. The last thing I saw before darkness took me was the Alpha King's face, pale against the mud, and the faint, barely there rise of his chest. Alive, for now. Chapter 2, A Debt of Life and Blood. I woke to the scent of antiseptic and dried herbs, a smell I knew well, but it had never felt so sterile, so cold. The ceiling above me was a flat, unfeeling white. For a disoriented moment, I wondered if this was death. Then the pain arrived, a deep, bone-aching soreness in every muscle and sharp, bright stings across my hands and arms. I tried to move and a gasp escaped my lips. Easy now, child. A woman's face appeared above me. Kind eyes, a calm mouth, and the silver pin of a senior healer gleaming on her collar. You've been asleep for a full day and night, your body demanded its due. The king, I rasped. My throat was raw, shredded by river water and screams. Is he alive? She said, and the relief that washed through me was so profound it brought fresh tears to my eyes. She pressed a cup of cool water to my lips, supporting my head. Awake, even, which is more than we expected, given the concussion. You did something impossible, Ilara Vane. Ilara, she knew my name. The water soothed my throat, but my mind was churning. Where was I? Where was Leora? How many had the river taken? You are in the Royal Medical Wing of Thorn Palace, the healer said, as if reading the questions on my face. Your friend Leora is well, shaken but unharmed. The bridge it claimed the drivers and 2 guards. Her voice softened. It would have claimed the king, too. And you, the weight of that settled on my chest. 4 lives gone, and I had added 2 to the ledger of the saved. The math of it felt cruel. He's been asking for you, she continued, a strange note in her voice. Every few hours since he woke, quite insistent. My heart gave a clumsy, frightened beat. Asking for me? Oh yes, she helped me sit up, fluffing pillows behind me. Through a tall window I saw a gray but calm sky. The storm had finally spent its rage. The royal guard has had to explain repeatedly that you needed rest. I don't believe His Majesty is accustomed to waiting. I looked down at my hands, swathed in clean bandages. The cuts from the carriage window throbbed beneath them. He wants to thank me, I suppose. The healer's expression grew more serious. She sat on the edge of the bed, her voice dropping. It will be more than thanks, Ilara. What you did, it has created complications. A chill that had nothing to do with my damp hair crept down my spine. Complications. I saved his life. Precisely, she said softly. You are unmated, yes, unclaimed by any pack. I nodded, utterly bewildered. The king is the paramount alpha, his wolf, his essence, it is a force of nature. In moments of extreme peril, of life and death, bonds can form. Not the mate bond, no, but something older, a primal recognition, a life debt. I stared at her. A debt, his wolf knows you, she whispered. It knows you fought for him, it knows your blood is in the water with his. Alphas, they do not forget such things. They cannot, to their nature such a debt is a tether, and they do not let go of what is tethered to them. The door to the chamber opened, not with a knock, it simply opened and the room changed, the air grew thicker, charged. The space seemed to shrink. Kalen Thorne filled the doorway. He was dressed simply in dark trousers and a tunic, but it did nothing to diminish him. He was power made flesh. The bruise on his temple was a lurid purple shadow, a brand of his mortality. But his eyes, they were a sharp, penetrating gray, like the edge of a storm, and they were fixed on me with an intensity that stole the breath from my lungs. "Leave us," he said. His voice was a low rumble, quieter than I expected, but it filled the silent room. The senior healer left without a word, closing the door softly behind her. The silence she left behind was immense, echoing. The Alpha King crossed the room in 3 strides and stopped at the foot of my bed. Up close, the force of him was overwhelming. It wasn't a threat, it was a fact, like standing too close to a cliff edge. "You're awake." He stated it, his eyes cataloging my bandages, my pallor. "Yes, Your Majesty. Do you know who I am?" It was such a strange question. "You are King Kalen Thorn, and do you know what you have done?" His gaze was unblinking. I swallowed. "I pulled you from the carriage." Something flickered in his stormy eyes. Amusement, disbelief. "You dragged 200 pounds of unconscious Alpha through a raging river and fought a current that drowns seasoned soldiers. My guards are baffled. My healers speak of miracles. The laws of physics, it seems, are offended." He leaned forward, his hands resting on the footboard of the bed. The wood creaked under his grip. "So I am asking you how?" The truth felt pathetic. "I don't know, I couldn't leave you there." "Why not?" The question was swift, sharp as a blade. "Because you would have died. People die." He said it flatly, especially in service to their king. "You could have saved yourself. You should have saved yourself. Instead, you risked everything for a stranger." That is either extraordinary courage or profound foolishness. "Perhaps it was both," I whispered, looking away from that piercing gaze. A sound escaped him, almost a laugh, but not quite. "What is your name?" Ilara Vane, Your Majesty." Ilara. He tasted the name. "Tell me, Ilara Vane, what do you want?" I blinked. "I don't understand." "Everyone wants something," he said, his voice cool, analytical. "Land, title, gold, a favor from the crown. You have earned a mountain of any of it. The court will demand I reward you. So tell me, what is your price?" I thought of my small room at the Healers' Academy, of my mother's worn hands, of the quiet satisfaction of setting a bone correctly, of easing a fever. I met his eyes. "I just want to be a healer, a good one. That's all I've ever wanted." He stared at me for a long, silent moment. His expression was utterly unreadable. Then he straightened. "You will remain at the palace. You will complete your training here with the royal physicians." It was not a suggestion, it was a decree. And he continued, his tone leaving no room for argument, "You will attend the Zenith Court in 3 days' time." My blood ran cold. The Zenith Court was the most formidable gathering of the year. Every major alpha, every pack leader, every scheming noble from across the realm came to the capital. It was a den of power, ambition, and deadly subtle politics. A place where someone like me was less than a speck of dust. "Your Majesty, I couldn't possibly." "You saved my life, Ilara," he interrupted, his voice dropping lower. "That makes you an object of intense curiosity and a potential target. Every wolf in that hall will want to see you, to assess you, to decide if you are a weakness to exploit or a prize to claim." His gaze hardened. "It is better they do so while you are under my direct protection." "I'm not a prize," I said, a spark of defiance igniting in my chest. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw something besides intensity or calculation. Something like respect. "No, you are not, but you should have considered that before you decided to become a problem, little healer." "A problem? The world does not allow extraordinary people to simply fade away." He turned and walked to the door. "Rest. Your new life begins now." He was gone, the door clicking shut with a sound of terrible finality. I sat in the vast, white silence, the healer's words echoing around me. A life debt, a tether, and the king's own words, a problem. I looked at my bandaged hands, at the reflection of a frightened, ordinary girl in the window glass. What had I pulled from that river, and what, in turn, had pulled me into a world I was never meant to survive? The debt was not his alone. I felt it then, the first tug of an invisible chain. I had saved the Alpha King, but who was going to save me from the consequences? Chapter 3, Gilded Cage. 3 days passed in a strange, muffled blur. They felt like a dream, a fever dream of hushed voices, probing questions, and the constant, prickling awareness of being watched. Healers with titles longer than my family history examined me. Royal guards with faces like carved stone took statements about the bridge, their questions precise, their eyes missing nothing. I repeated the story until the words felt empty, until the memory of the cold water and the cracking glass began to feel like something that had happened to someone else. Leora visited on the second day. The relief in her eyes when she saw me was bright and real, but it was clouded by something else, a new distance, a wary hesitation. "You're all anyone talks about," she said, perched on the edge of the visitor's chair. Her voice was a careful whisper. The junior healer who defied death and dragged death's own king back from the brink. The halls are buzzing with it. "It wasn't like that," I murmured, tracing a thread on the blanket. "It was just panic, instinct." Maybe. She didn't sound convinced. "But the buzzing says the king has ordered you moved to the Sunstone Wing, the guest wing, Alara, where foreign ambassadors and high lords stay." My stomach twisted. "That's absurd. I don't belong there." "You didn't belong there," Leora corrected softly, and this time the edge in her voice was unmistakable. Now you're the girl who saved the Alpha King. That makes you something, whether you want to be or not." She left soon after, citing duties in the main infirmary, but the space she left behind felt heavier than her presence had. That evening, the transition happened. 2 silent servants arrived, packed my few meager things, the spare dress, my well-worn healer's manual, and escorted me through corridors that grew wider, grander, quieter. The air smelled of lemon polish and old wealth. My new quarters were not a room, they were a realm. Sunlight, now gentle and golden, poured through tall windows that overlooked a private courtyard garden. A bed wider than my entire cot at the academy dominated the space, piled with linens so fine they felt like cloud, and in the carved wardrobe hung a gown. It was the color of a deep winter twilight, a blue so rich it was nearly black, shot through with subtle silver threads that shimmered like trapped starlight. It was terrifyingly beautiful. On a small table beside it lay a single card. The handwriting was bold, assertive. "For the Zenith Court, KT." I reached out a bandaged finger and touched the sleeve. The silk was cool, impossibly soft. A gown for a storybook princess, not for a Lara Vane who smelled of antiseptic and humble herbs. This was really happening. In 2 nights, I would have to walk into the lion's den, wearing a skin that wasn't mine, under the protection of a wolf who saw me as a living, breathing complication. I moved to the full-length mirror. The girl who looked back was a stranger. Pale hair, still lank from illness, framed a face too thin, eyes too large with lingering fear. The bandages on my hands were stark white against my skin. I looked exactly like what I was, a commoner who had stumbled into a legend and was now drowning in the aftermath. "You should have considered that before you decided to become a problem," his words echoed, but I hadn't decided anything, I had simply acted, a reflex born of a lifetime of training to preserve life, any life. A fundamental flaw in my character that could not watch another perish if there was a sliver of a chance to prevent it. That reflex had saved a king, and it had shattered my own simple, quiet future. I pressed my palm against the cold mirror, watching my reflection waver. What had I truly pulled from that wreckage, and what terrifying new current had I been swept into? A soft knock sounded at the door, different from the servants. It was firmer. "Miss Vane," a guard's voice, respectful but edged with steel. "His Majesty requests your presence in the map room at your earliest convenience." A request from the king was a command in velvet gloves. I took a shuddering breath, smoothed my simple hospital shift, and opened the door. The map room was not what I expected. It was a circular tower room, walls lined not with books but with vast, meticulously detailed maps of the kingdom, Thorn's Reach painted on stretched leather. In the center stood a great round table of polished oak, its surface carved with topographic lines of mountains and rivers. And standing at the window, his back to me, was Caelan Thorn. He turned as I entered. Out of the sick room in his own domain, he was even more formidable. He wore dark, practical clothes that spoke of readiness, not courtly show. The bruise on his temple was fading to yellow, a fading badge of his vulnerability. Ilara, he didn't use my title. Come, look. I approached slowly, my bare feet silent on the thick rug. He gestured to the map on the table. This is the kingdom you saved. His finger traced a line. The Serpent's Gorge, the bridge here was old. Its collapse was not entirely unexpected by some. A cold trickle, unrelated to the river, went down my spine. Not unexpected, some would benefit from instability, from a show of royal weakness. His gray eyes met mine. Your act of heroism prevented that particular narrative, but it spawned others. Others, he leaned on the table, his presence overwhelming the detailed geography. You are an anomaly, a variable no one accounted for. To the court, you are a puzzle. Is your saving me a sign of divine favor, a cunning plot, or simply a stupendous accident? He studied my face. Your lack of family influence makes you harder to categorize, and what the wolves of the court cannot categorize, they seek to control or break. I don't want to be controlled, I whispered, the defiance flickering again. I know, he said it simply, which is why you are here and not in the crowded halls. The Zenith Court will be your first test. You will be observed. Every word, every glance, every tremor in your hand will be noted, analyzed, and reported. The enormity of it crushed the breath from me. I can't do that. I'll make a mistake. I'll say something wrong. You will, he agreed, startling me. You are not a courtier. The trick is not to be perfect. The trick is to ensure your mistakes are not the ones they expect. He moved around the table towards me. They expect a frightened mouse grateful for scraps or a cunning social climber grasping for power. Show them neither. What should I show them? My voice was barely a breath. He stopped an arm's length away. Show them the girl who looked at a sinking carriage and a king twice her size and thought, no, not today. Show them that steel. Because that, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, that is the only thing that will keep you safe when I am not standing beside you. For a long moment we stood in silence, the weight of the maps, the kingdom, his gaze pressing down on me. I finally found my voice. Why are you telling me this? Why not just dress me up and parade me as the lucky peasant? It would be simpler. Because, he said, turning back to the window, his profile stark against the fading light, the kingdom has enough puppets. It could use a person, even a problematic one. He dismissed me then with a nod. I walked back to my gilded rooms in a daze, his words churning inside me. Show them the steel. But where was it? I felt like rust, fragile and flaking. The gown in the wardrobe seemed to mock me, a costume for a role I could never play. That night I didn't sleep. I stood at the window, watching the moon paint the courtyard in silver and shadow. Somewhere in this vast, silent palace, the Alpha King was also awake, I was sure of it. Planning, calculating, guarding his kingdom. And somewhere beyond these walls, in the dark forests and cold mountains, other wolves were stirring. Wolves who had heard of the bridge, of the king's near death. Of the girl, the storm of the river had passed. But a new storm was gathering in the halls of power, and I was stranded directly in its path. The gilded cage was beautiful, but a cage it remained. And I had no idea how to pick the lock or if I even should. The only thing I knew was that the Zenith Court awaited, a trial by glitter and claw, and I was utterly, completely unprepared. Chapter 4: The Zenith Court. The night of the Zenith Court arrived not with a whisper, but with a deafening, glittering roar. It vibrated through the very stones of Thorn Palace. Standing before the carved door of my chambers, I felt that vibration in my teeth, in the marrow of my bones. The twilight blue gown clung to me, heavier than any armor. The silver threads caught the candlelight, making me feel like a shivering, exposed constellation. My hair, twisted into an elegant knot by a silent maid, felt like a stranger's head perched upon my shoulders. You look appropriate, miss, the maid had said, her eyes carefully blank. Appropriate, a word for furniture, for curtains, not for a person. A knock, firm and final, shattered the silence. Miss Vane, it is time. The walk to the great hall was a march to an executioner's block. The palace corridors, so quiet before, were now a river of silk, velvet, and perfume. Alphas and their retinues flowed past me, their eyes sharp, assessing, dismissive, sliding over my form like fingers over a weapon's edge. I kept my gaze fixed on the guard's back, my bandaged hands hidden in the deep folds of the impossible silk. Then the doors, they were twice the height of any man, carved with the history of the thorns, wolves, battles, crowns. They swung inward and the world erupted. Light. 1,000 candles blazing in crystal chandeliers, reflecting off gold thread and polished gemstones. Sound, a tidal wave of laughter, conversation, clinking glass swirling into a symphony of power. Smell, expensive perfume, spiced wine, the faint, primal scent of many wolves gathered close. And then silence. A rolling, crushing wave of it as my name was called into the vastness. Miss Alara Vane. Every head turned, every conversation died, hundreds of eyes, curious, hostile, calculating, fixed upon me, a single, stark figure in blue at the entrance to their world, my throat sealed shut. This was worse than drowning. Drowning was simple. This was a death by 1,000 silent cuts. Then he was there. Caelan Thorne parted the crowd not by force but by sheer presence. Wolves instinctively moved aside. He was a mountain in black and charcoal, his formal attire amplifying his breadth, his quiet, lethal grace. The fading bruise was a ghost on his temple. His storm-gray eyes found mine across the impossible distance, and in them was an anchor, not comfort but certainty. He crossed the hall, the silence deepening with each step. He stopped before me and extended his hand, not to shake, to take, walk with me. I placed my trembling, bandaged hand in his. His grasp was warm, solid, engulfing. It was not a gentle hold, it was a claim. The crowd rippled as we moved through it, a wake of hissed whispers flowing in our path. Saved his life, just a healer, what does he intend? No pack, no family, how quaint. He led me to the dais where 5 great chairs sat, thrones in all but name. He guided me not to a smaller one off to the side, but to the chair immediately to the right of the largest, the one carved with the snarling wolf's head. The seat of the highest honor. He did not release my hand until I was seated, the cool wood feeling like a block of ice beneath me. Breathe, Alara. His voice was so low only I could hear it, a rumble beneath the returning din. They are only people. Dangerous, hungry people, but people still. That, I whispered back, my voice tight, is not reassuring, Your Majesty. It was not meant to be reassuring, it was meant to be true. He settled into his own throne with the ease of a predator claiming its rock. And when we are alone, you may call me Caelan. I stared at him, incredulous. We are hardly alone, there must be 300 people here. He made a slight, dismissive gesture with his fingers. Are there? I hadn't noticed. Against the terror, against the overwhelming pressure, a faint, hysterical spark of something like humor flickered in my chest. It died instantly as the formal presentations began. One by one, the powerful approached the dais. Lords and ladies of great packs, their bows precise, their words layered with meanings I could barely grasp. Their eyes were the worst, lingering on my face, my hands, my gown, stripping me down to my constituent parts of use and threat. Lady Seraphine of the Frostfall Highlands was all icy elegance and a smile that never reached her pale blue eyes. What a remarkable tale, my dear, to possess such fortitude and from an unaffiliated line. It is inspiring. The word unaffiliated was a delicate poison. Thank you, my lady, I managed, my voice thin. Fortitude is often born of necessity, Seraphine, Caelan said, his tone conversational, but the temperature around us seemed to drop. A concept your pack, safe in its high valleys, might occasionally forget. Lady Seraphine's perfect smile tightened and she withdrew. You didn't have to do that, I murmured when she was gone. Yes, he said, his eyes scanning the crowd like a general surveying a field. I did. They are testing the waters, determining if you are weak enough to be pushed or strong enough to require a different approach. Every word I speak to you, every glance sets a precedent. A precedent for what? I dared to ask. He turned his head slowly, and the full force of his attention was like a physical weight. For how you will be treated from this night forward. Whether they see you as under my protection or as fair game, the ice in my veins thickened. And which am I? That, he said, his gaze unwavering, depends entirely on you. What do you wish to be? Before I could even form a thought, a new disturbance rippled through the hall. A chill entered the air, a draft that had nothing to do with the doors. The crowd at the far end seemed to shrink back, parting like tall grass before a hunter. They entered not as guests but as a pack on the prowl. Dressed in worn, dark leathers and gray fur, their faces were marked not with paint but with deliberate ritual scars. The Shadowfen pack, isolated, traditional, feared. And at their center walked a man who made the concept of alpha feel newly savage. He was as tall as Kalen, but leaner, like a blade honed over centuries of conflict. Black hair was tied tightly back, revealing a face cross-hatched with scars, one pulling the corner of his mouth into a permanent, grim mockery of a smile. His eyes were the pale, flat yellow of a winter wolf. When he moved, the world adjusted around him. "Kalen," the man said. His voice was gravel grinding on stone, no title, no deference. The rumors reached even our fens. They said the great King of Thorns' reach was nearly drowned by a bit of weather. It seemed improbable. "Thuron," Kalen replied, his voice devoid of all warmth. The name hung in the air, Thuron Blackwood, Alpha of Shadowfen. "I see you still mistake theatrics for strength. Some things never change." A ripple of shock. No one spoke to Thuron Blackwood that way and lived. His pack members shifted, hands drifting to weapons they should not have carried into this hall. Thuron's yellow gaze slid from Kalen and landed on me. It was like being doused in freezing swamp water. "And this is the little creature who performed the miracle." He mused, taking a step closer to the dais. "She looks more like a drowned field mouse than a savior." "This is Miss Alara Vane," Kalen said, each word a chip of ice. "You will address her with the respect her actions have earned." Respect. Thuron let out a short, barking sound that was nothing like laughter. For what, being in the right place when luck struck, any one of my hunters could have done the same. "Then it is fortunate," Kalen said, rising slowly from his throne. The movement was pure, controlled power. That one of mine was there instead. "If you have come to issue a challenge, Blackwood, do it properly. If you have come to pay your respects, do that, but do not waste my time with your posturing." The hall was a tomb. This was the spark. This was where the fragile peace would shatter into bloodshed. I could feel it, a metallic taste on my tongue. Thuron held Kalen's stare for an eternity, then his scar-twisted mouth curved further. "No challenge, not tonight." His predatory gaze returned to me, dissecting. "I am merely curious. Such blind loyalty to a crown is a rare artifact these days." "It wasn't loyalty," I heard myself say. The words left my mouth before my mind could cage them. Every eye in the hall swiveled back to me, a pressure more intense than the river's current. It was just the right thing to do. Thuron's head tilted, the motion unnervingly animal. "The right thing," he repeated, as if tasting a foreign, absurd concept. How refreshingly mortal. He looked back at Kalen. "She will not last a month in this den of vipers with that philosophy. That is not your concern." "Perhaps not," Thuron conceded, signaling his pack with a slight jerk of his chin. They began to melt back into the crowd. As he turned to leave, he paused, his yellow eyes pinning me once more. "A word of advice, little mouse. In the world of wolves, the right thing and the surviving thing are seldom the same. Choose carefully which one you cherish more." They were gone, leaving a void of cold dread in their wake. I realized I was shaking, a fine tremor I could not control. Kalen's hand came down on my shoulder, warm and heavy as a yoke. "You did well," he murmured. "I didn't do anything." "Exactly," he said, a hint of approval in his voice. "You did not cower, you did not simper, you did not try to appease him. You stated a simple truth. That is a strength they do not understand and therefore cannot easily attack. He released my shoulder, but his words stayed with me, a fragile shield. The rest of the night was a kaleidoscope of more faces, more veiled words, more excruciating scrutiny. I was a specimen under glass, and every noble in the kingdom was taking notes. When the final guest had left and the hall stood empty, echoing with the ghosts of intrigue, Kalen walked me back to the Sunstone Wing himself. The palace was quiet again, the silence now feeling bruised. That, he said as we reached my door, was the first trial you survived. It was terrifying. Good, fear keeps you sharp. He leaned a shoulder against the doorframe, the formidable king replaced for a moment by a weary man. The Zenith Court continues for 3 more nights. Tomorrow will be easier. 3 more nights, yes. And tomorrow afternoon you will join me for a meeting of the Royal Council. The floor seemed to tilt. Your Majesty, Kalen, I am a healer. I don't belong in council meetings. You are the person who saved my life, he said, his weariness vanishing, replaced by that unyielding certainty. That makes you a person of interest to the realm, and persons of interest must understand the realm that finds them interesting. His expression hardened. After tonight, every alpha from here to the Shadowfen knows your name and your face. It is better you learn the game before someone decides to use you as a pawn. A pawn in what game? That, he said, straightening up, is what the council will discuss. Get some rest, Alara. Tomorrow is a different kind of battlefield. He left me standing there, the silken gown suddenly a prison, the beautiful hallway a gilded maze. Thuron Blackwood's words slithered in my mind. The right thing and the surviving thing. I had chosen the river. I had chosen what was right. And in doing so, I had jumped from one raging current into another, far more treacherous one. The court was not a hall, it was a forest, and I was now unmistakably prey. The only question was who would be the first to pounce. Chapter 5, The Council of Wolves. Dawn arrived, pale and unwelcome. I had not slept. My mind was a cage of echoing voices, Thuron's gravelled threat, the hiss of courtly whispers, Kalen's relentless calm. The servant brought a simple, dove-gray dress and a light breakfast I could not force past the knot in my throat. The Zenith Court gown hung in the wardrobe like a shed skin, a reminder of the performance that was now my life. The guard who came for me was different from the previous one. Older, his face a map of old battles, his eyes missing nothing. He said nothing as he led me deeper into the palace's stone heart, to a part that smelled of old parchment, sealing wax, and cold ambition. The council chamber was smaller than I feared, but infinitely more intimidating. It was a perfect circle of dark, polished wood that seemed to drink the light from a single high window. A round oak table, ancient and scarred, dominated the space. Around it sat the most powerful people in Thorn's Reach, and every one of them stopped talking when I entered. Miss Vane, a woman with a severe, handsome face and hair streaked like iron and silver, nodded to an empty chair. Sit, we have been waiting. Her bearing was military, her tone leaving no room for question. I sat, the chair impossibly hard beneath me. Kalen sat directly opposite, his face a neutral mask, giving me no anchor. I am Commander Lyra, the silver-haired woman stated, head of the Royal Guard. For those at this table who do not know her, this is Alara Vane, the healer who pulled our king from the Serpent's Gorge. A man with spectacles and ink-stained fingers, a chronicler or strategist, cleared his throat. We are all aware of the incident, Commander. The pressing matter is the political aftermath. Miss Vane's actions have created a complication. A complication. The word burst from me, edged with a frustration I could no longer contain. I saved the king's life. How is that a complication? Several counselors exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Commander Lyra fixed me with her steel-gray gaze. Because by saving him, you have placed yourself at the center of a web you cannot see. Pacts are shifting. Alliances are being questioned. Some see you as a potential weakness in the royal armor. Others see you as a key to unlock it. I'm not a key. I'm not a weakness, I'm a healer. You were a healer, the spectacled man, Caspian, I remembered, said softly. Now you are a symbol, and symbols are tools, Miss Vane. Thuron Blackwood's display last night was not mere rudeness, it was a probe. He and others like him are deciding how best to use you. Use me for what? Commander Lyra leaned forward. To undermine the king. A king who is strong, unmated, and now publicly indebted to an outsider is a king who appears vulnerable. Your very existence challenges the established order. That makes you dangerous to some and valuable to others. A younger woman with fiery red hair and keen, restless eyes spoke next, and let's not ignore the bond. Her name was Isolde, I recalled. She handled trade and it was rumored intelligence. The life debt is not a fairy tale. The king's wolf has recognized her scent in his blood. That creates a tether, a primal one. It cannot be simply dismissed. Thank you, Isolde, Kaelin said, his voice dry. I am intimately aware of my own wolf's inclinations. Are you? Isolde challenged, her fingers drumming the table, because the entire court saw you seat her at your right hand. You painted a target on her back the size of the palace, or a shield. It's hard to tell which from here. And what would you have had me do? Kaelin's tone remained level, but a new intensity hummed beneath it. Leave her in a corner for Blackwood or Seraphine to scoop up as a political trinket. Let them parade her as proof of my vulnerability. I am not a trinket, I said, my voice louder than I intended. The sound echoed in the quiet room. Silence fell heavy and thick, then Kaelin's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. No, you are not, which is precisely why you are so problematic for men like Thuron. I looked around the table at the faces of power, calculating, worried, analytical. I don't understand any of this. I just wanted to help people, to heal. Why does everything have to be about power and in games? Because, Commander Lyra said, not unkindly, that is the world we live in, and like it or not, you are in it now, up to your neck. Caspian adjusted his spectacles. There is a potential solution, a way to clarify the ambiguity of your status. He looked at Kaelin, then at me. If Miss Vane were to formally petition to join the royal pack, to become a ward of the crown, it would grant her official protection and make her position clear. She would be off the board, so to speak. The words hung in the air. A ward, off the board. You mean make me property of the throne, I stated, my voice flat and cold. I mean make you safe, Caspian countered. There is a difference, is there? I looked at Kaelin. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. He stood up abruptly. This meeting is concluded. His voice cut through the tension. Miss Vane is under my personal protection. That is the only clarification required. Anyone who has an issue with that may bring it to me directly. His gaze swept the table, a silent alpha command. Are we clear? There were murmured assents. The council members began to gather their papers, their eyes avoiding mine as they filed out. Isolde lingered last, her sharp eyes studying me. You've got more spine than you look, she said quietly, or less sense, I haven't decided. She glanced at Kaelin, who was speaking in low tones with Commander Lyra by the door. He's trying to protect you. Just remember, protection can start to feel an awful lot like a gilded cage if you're not careful. With a final, unreadable look, she was gone. I was alone at the vast, scarred table, the weight of the morning of my new reality pressed down on me. Saving a life shouldn't mean being discussed like a disputed territory. It shouldn't mean choosing between being a pawn or a prisoner. Ilara. Kaelin's voice pulled me from the dark spiral. The room was empty now. He walked over and sat in the chair Caspian had vacated, closer to me. Walk with me, he said, not a request but softer than a command. I followed him out of the chamber, down a narrow, spiraling stone staircase I hadn't noticed before, and out onto a high, windswept balcony that overlooked the military training grounds far below. The air was clean and cold, scoured of perfume and politics. I apologize, he said after a long moment of watching the tiny figures drill. That was clumsier than it needed to be. They want to put me in a box, label me, so I'm not a problem anymore. They want a solution that fits on a parchment and can be sealed with wax, he corrected, turning to face me, the wind tugging at his dark hair. The world is messier than that. You are messier than that. What do you want, Kalen? I asked, using his name for the first time without his prompting. It felt dangerous. Not the council, not the kingdom. What do you want to do with your complication? He studied me, his stormy eyes tracing the lines of worry on my face. I want to understand why you did it. I told you it was the right thing. No, he said, taking a step closer. That's what you did. I want to know why. Why you when anyone else would have turned away. Why you fought a river and physics and your own survival instinct. I am surrounded by people who act only after calculating 100 possible outcomes. You just acted. He was too close. The intensity of his focus was a physical force. I don't know why, I whispered, the truth laid bare. I just couldn't do nothing. It's not courage, it's a flaw. A flaw, he repeated, and this time a real smile touched his eyes, softening the hard lines of his face. A glorious, impossible flaw. He looked back over the balcony. They're afraid of you, not because you're powerful, but because you're unpredictable. You don't play by their rules because you don't even know the game. And are you afraid of me? The question was out before I could stop it. He looked back at me, his smile fading into something more profound, more unsettling. No, Ilara Vane, I am fascinated by you, and in this court that is far more dangerous. He left me then on the windy balcony with the chilling understanding of what he'd just said. I wasn't a pawn to him, I was a mystery, and in a world that valued control above all, a mystery was the most threatening thing of all. The cage they wanted to put me in had no bars he could build. The real trap was the intrigue itself, the constant scrutiny, the slow erosion of who I was until I became the symbol they needed me to be. Isolde was right. This protection was already beginning to feel like a cage, and I had no idea how to pick a lock made of reputation, debt, and the piercing, fascinated gaze of an alpha king. Chapter 6: Whispers and Warnings. The afternoon sun was a pale, forgiving thing after the chill of the council balcony. Seeking sanctuary, I fled to the one place that had ever felt like my own, the Royal Medical Wing. The sharp, clean scents of willow bark, mint, and antiseptic were a balm after the cloying perfumes of the court. Here, among the rows of drying herbs and neatly labeled tinctures, I could almost pretend I was just Ilara Vane, apprentice. The illusion shattered the moment I crossed the threshold. Conversations hushed. Fellow healers, juniors I'd shared benches with just weeks ago, looked up, their expressions flickering between polite deference and wary curiosity. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a careful, measured distance. I was no longer one of them. I was the king's complication, walking among them in a gown too fine for the workrooms. I found a quiet corner in the herb preparation chamber and set to grinding valerian root with a mortar and pestle. The rhythmic, physical work was a prayer for normalcy. Crush, grind, breathe, sow. The royal council. Leora's voice came from the doorway. She leaned against the frame, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She hadn't spoken to me since our strained conversation in my sick room. Word travels fast, I said, not looking up, focusing on the fragrant powder. Everything about you travels at the speed of lightning now. She pushed off the door and came to stand across the wide wooden workbench. What was it like, sitting in a room with the wolves who really run the kingdom? I finally met her eyes, terrifying and confusing. They talked about me like I was a disputed border treaty. I know, the words were soft, but they carried a sharp edge. Some of us have trained since we could walk. We've memorized every bone, every herb, worked until our hands cramped and our eyes burned, all for a chance to be noticed, to be deemed worthy of a post at a minor noble's house. She looked down at her own capable, unadorned hands. And you walk into the palace, pull the king from a river, and suddenly you're at council meetings. You're wearing silk, you're sitting at his right hand. Her gaze lifted, and the hurt in it was raw and undeniable. You didn't earn that seat, Alara. You fell into it. The words were like slaps, true and therefore cruel. I would trade places with you in a heartbeat, Leora, I said, my voice trembling with sincerity. You think I want this scrutiny, this feeling that every move I make is being judged. I want to be invisible again. I want to grind herbs and set bones without 100 eyes watching me. She studied me for a long, silent moment. The anger in her face slowly bled away, leaving behind a weary resignation. I believe you, she sighed. Which is somehow the most frustrating part of all. She gestured to the mortar. Come on, Senior Healer Marin wants us to observe the new poultice protocols in the recovery ward. At least there you're still just a student, like the rest of us. It was a peace offering, fragile and thin, but I grasped it with both hands. Thank you. The recovery ward was a place of quiet suffering and slow hope. The patients here were guards injured in training, servants who'd had accidents, ordinary people in pain. Here my strange new status mattered less. Here I could be useful. I watched Marin demonstrate the new honey and yarrow poultice for wound cleansing, taking notes, asking questions about viscosity and application frequency. For an hour, I was just a healer again. But as we were leaving, an elderly guard with a bandaged leg caught my eye. You're her, aren't you? He whispered as I passed his cot. The river girl. Before I could answer, he gave a slow, solemn nod. The men in the barracks, we'd follow a king who inspires that kind of loyalty, remember that. His words followed me out of the ward, a new kind of weight. It wasn't just the court that was watching. The whole kingdom was weaving its own story around me. That evening I could not face the second night of the Zenith Court. The thought of more glittering masks, more predatory smiles, more of Thuron Blackwood's yellow gaze, it made my skin crawl. I sent my regrets via a nervous servant and claimed exhaustion. It wasn't a lie. Alone in my lavish chambers, I stood at the window as dusk painted the gardens in indigo and gold. The palace was alive with distant music and laughter, a world of revelry from which I was now self-exiled. What were they saying about my absence? Was it seen as weakness? Insolence, a strategic retreat, a knock sounded at my door, not the servant's timid tap, but something firmer, more authoritative. When I opened it, Kalen stood there, still in the formal attire of the court. The faint scent of night air and something wild clung to him. You're not there, he observed, his voice neutral. Very perceptive, I said, too tired for proper deference. I was weary. I told you to call me Kalen when we're alone. He glanced past me into the room. May I come in? Or is that too scandalous for a healer's sensibilities? I think the time for worrying about scandal has passed, I said, stepping aside. He walked to the window, looking out at the same darkening view. In the quiet lamplight of the room, he seemed less like a king and more like a man carrying a crushing burden. They're talking about you, he said without turning, speculating, wondering if your absence is illness or a message or a calculated slight. I'm just tired, I repeated, hugging my arms around myself. I know, but they don't see tired, they see calculation. In this world, even a sigh is a political statement. He finally turned, his face shadowed. Thuron made his move tonight. He has formally petitioned the court for the blood-right trials. The words meant nothing to me, but the way he said them, like a judge pronouncing a sentence, sent a chill through the room. What are those? An ancient tradition. When the strength of the ruling pack is questioned, or when succession is unclear, rival alphas can call for trials. Combat, strategy, endurance, pack against pack. His jaw tightened, a muscle flickering. And he has specifically, publicly, challenged the right of the royal pack to exclude its newest member from participating. The floor dropped away. Me, he wants me to fight in some ancient trial. He wants you to fail, publicly, humiliatingly. To prove that your saving me was a fluke, that you are weak, that my protection of you is the sentimentality of a softened king. If you fail, it undermines my authority at its core. He took a step closer, his eyes grave. It's a trap, Alara. If I refuse, I look like a coward hiding behind a woman. If I accept, I send you into a contest you cannot possibly win. The cold logic of it was horrifying. I was a surgical knife being used to perform a political amputation on the king himself. So what do? We don't do anything, he said, his voice firm. This is my fight. You have been thrust into enough battles not of your making. He paused, his gaze searching my face. There is another option. You could leave tonight. I can have a horse and an escort ready before the moon reaches its zenith. I will send you anywhere you wish, to the southern coast, the eastern libraries, a quiet healing house in the mountains. You can finish your training in peace, away from all of this. The offer hung in the air between us, shimmering with the promise of escape, safety, the life I'd dreamed of before the bridge, before the river, before the king. All I had to do was walk away from the gilded cage, from the complicated, fascinating man who stood before me, from the terrifying destiny I had accidentally grasped. I thought of the river's roar, of the feeling of his weight so impossibly heavy in my arms. Of the choice I'd made in that watery tomb, a choice that defied all sense. I thought of the elderly guard's words, we'd follow a king who inspires that kind of loyalty. I looked at Kalen, at the weariness and resolve etched into his features. He was offering me a back door, an escape from the prison he himself was trapped in. No, I said, the word clear and firm in the quiet room. I'm not running. His eyes widened slightly. Alara, this is not pride, this is. I'm not running, I repeated, taking a step toward him. If Thuron wants a trial, then he can have one, but on one condition. His brow furrowed. What condition? You teach me. I held his stormy gaze, my own resolve hardening. I can't fight like a warrior. But I'm not helpless, I learn quickly. Whatever these trials involve, you give me a real chance. You don't just throw me to the wolves and hope I'm not eaten. You train me to survive them. A slow, incredulous smile began to spread across Kalen's face. It transformed him, lighting his eyes with a fierce, proud light. You are either the bravest person I have ever met or the most foolish. I've lost count of how many times I've been told that, I said, a shaky smile of my own touching my lips. He extended his hand, not to take mine, but in a gesture of pact. Dawn, the western training yard, don't wear silk. I placed my hand in his, feeling the calluses, the strength, the promise. I'll be there. He left and the room felt different. The cage was still there, but I had just agreed to learn how to fight within it. The fear was still a cold stone in my belly, but it was now joined by something else, a spark of defiant fire. I had chosen the river. I had chosen the right thing. Now I was choosing the hard thing. I was choosing to stay. And as I looked out at the moonlit gardens, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Thuron Blackwood had just made a terrible mistake. He had assumed I was a mouse to be crushed. He was about to learn that even mice have teeth, and this one had just decided to learn how to bite. Chapter 7, forged in dawnlight dawn in the western training yard, was a world of gray mist, hard-packed earth, and the smell of damp leather. I arrived in the simple gray dress from the day before, my hair tightly braided, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The vast, empty space seemed to yawn around me, waiting for my failure. He was already there. Kalen stood in the center of the yard, wearing only trousers and a worn linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and old scars. He looked less like a king and more like an elemental force, a cliff face against which I was about to throw myself. He didn't greet me with words. He simply picked up 2 wooden practice swords from a rack and tossed one to me. I fumbled the catch, the smooth wood clattering to the ground, a test already. I bent to retrieve it, my face burning. The first thing you must understand, he said, his voice echoing in the quiet, is that you will lose, every time, for days, perhaps weeks. Your goal is not to win, your goal is to learn how to lose without being broken. He took a stance, fluid and balanced. Now, attack me. I stared at him, the practice sword feeling alien and ridiculous in my healer's hands. I don't know how. Then you will learn by doing. Attack. Swallowing my terror, I rushed at him, swinging the sword in a wild, clumsy arc. He didn't even move his feet. He simply brought his own sword up in a casual parry that sent a jolting shock up my arms, making my fingers sting. With a twist of his wrist, my sword was wrenched from my grip, spinning through the air to land in the dirt several feet away. Again, he said, his face impassive. This went on for what felt like hours. Rush, disarm, stumble, retrieve. Each time the shock of impact traveled deeper into my bones, my palms grew raw, my shoulders screamed. Sweat plastered my dress to my back despite the morning chill. He was an immovable object, and I was a wave of futility crashing against him. Finally, as I lay panting on the ground after a particularly brutal disarming, tears of frustration and pain mingling with the sweat on my face, he spoke again. You are using your strength. You have none, not compared to what you will face. He knelt beside me, his voice lowering. You are a healer, you know the body. Where is it weak? Where is it unbalanced? I looked up at him through blurred vision. The joints, the knees, the ankles. The connection of the shoulder to the torso. Yes, he stood and offered me a hand. Stop trying to hit me, start trying to unmake me. Use my strength against me, use my weight, my momentum. The next session was different. I didn't charge, I circled. I watched. He would lunge, and instead of meeting the blow, I would try to sidestep, to hook a foot behind his ankle as he passed. The first dozen times I failed, tumbling into the dirt, but then once I saw the slight shift in his shoulder before he moved. I pivoted, my foot snaking out. It didn't trip him, not even close, but it made him adjust his balance just for a fraction of a second. He stopped. A slow smile touched his lips. Good, now you are thinking. That good was a spark in the darkness. It lit a fire in my chest that burned away some of the fatigue. We moved from swords to hand, his lessons brutal and efficient. He taught me pressure points, not to kill, but to stun, to create an opening. He taught me how to fall without shattering, how to roll with an impact. Commander Lyra joined us on the third day, her silver braids severe, her eyes missing nothing. You're still leading with your fear, she barked as I faced Kaelin again. Your chin is up. Your breath is in your throat, breathe from your gut. Plant your feet like you mean to stand your ground, even if you plan to run. Under their dual assault, Kaelin's relentless physical pressure, Lyra's sharp tactical corrections, I began to change, not into a warrior, but into something else. My body, always lean from work and study, grew harder, more defined. My reflexes sharpened. I learned to read the subtle language of a body preparing to strike. The lessons weren't only of combat. In the quiet moments as we drank water from a shared skin, Kaelin would talk. Thuron will choose 3 trials, he said one morning, wiping his brow. Combat is assured. He will pick a champion, likely Dax, his war leader. Dax is not subtle. He is a hammer. You cannot be the anvil. What do I be? The water, Kaelin said, his gray eyes distant. The water wears down the stone. You evade, you exhaust. You find the one flaw in his stance and you exploit it. You do not win by beating him. You win by surviving him. Another day, he spoke of his father. He believed strength was only in the muscle, in the show of force. He died in a war that could have been won with words a decade earlier. He looked at me, a strange intensity in his gaze. You have a different strength, one this court has forgotten. Do not let them beat it out of you. 3 weeks passed in a blur of aching muscles, bruised skin, and slowly dawning competence. The raw terror began to be edged with a sliver of grim confidence. I would never be a match for a trained warrior in pure power, but I was learning to be a problem, a frustrating, elusive, unpredictable problem. The evening before the trials were to be announced, Leora found me in the bath, trying to soak the deep aches from my body. She sat on the stool, her expression complex. The whole palace is placing bets, she said quietly, on how quickly you'll fall, on which trial will break you. I sank deeper into the hot water, closing my eyes. What do you bet? A long silence. Then I bet you'll surprise them all. I opened my eyes. She wasn't smiling, but her gaze was steady, the old friendship glimmering beneath the new caution. Why? Because I've seen you study a fever for 3 days without sleep until you found the right herb. Because you don't know how to give up. She stood to leave. Just don't get yourself killed proving me right, Alara. The infirmary is dull without you. After she left, I lay in the cooling water, thinking not of swords or tactics, but of roots and fevers. Of persistence, that was my strength, not to overpower but to outlast. A soft knock came at the outer chamber door. Wrapping myself in a robe, I opened it to find Kalen. He looked weary, the candlelight from the hall carving deep shadows under his eyes. In his hand was a small bundle of dark leather. "Tomorrow it begins," he said, his voice rough. "The formal announcement at noon. The trials start at dawn the day after." He held out the bundle. "This is for you." I took it. Unfolding it, I found a set of fitted fighting leathers. They were supple, dark, and designed for freedom of movement, not the restrictive, decorative armor of the court. "A healer in healer's robes is a target," he said quietly. "A healer in this is a question mark. Let them wonder what you are." I ran my fingers over the cool leather. "Thank you." He didn't leave. He stood there, the silence stretching between us, fraught with all the unspoken words of the past weeks, the shared exhaustion, the moments of unexpected understanding, the terrifying, fragile thing that was growing in the space between a king and a commoner who had saved his life. "I cannot protect you in the arena," he finally said, the words seeming to cost him something. "Once you step onto the sand, you are alone. My authority, my protection, it means nothing there. All that will matter is what you have learned, and who you are." "I know," I whispered. He reached out then, slowly, and his thumb brushed a droplet of bathwater from my cheek. The touch was startling in its gentleness. "Then know this too, Alara Vane, winning or losing does not matter to me. Walking off that sand alive, that is the only victory I care about." He left then, before I could find a reply. I stood in the doorway, the leathers held tight against my chest, his words and his touch burning on my skin. The forge of dawnlight had reshaped my body, but it was his words tonight that were forging something else inside me, a resolve tempered not by anger but by something far more dangerous. Something that felt dangerously like a reason to fight, not just for my life but for the man who had just shown me in his own stark way that he saw me. Not as a complication, not as a symbol, but as Alara. And for the first time since the river, I was not afraid of the trials. I was ready for them. Let Thuron Blackwood send his hammer, I would be the water, and I would show the entire kingdom that even water could drown those who underestimated its depth. Chapter 8. The arena's echo. The day of the announcement dawned not with mist, but with a sharp, clear cold that promised nothing but stark truth. The palace felt different, a coiled tension in the air, a held breath. The zenith court was over, but the real theater was just beginning. At noon, the great courtyard before the palace filled not with courtiers in silk, but with packs in their colors, warriors in leather, and common folk who had streamed in from the city, drawn by the scent of impending spectacle. I stood on a balcony overlooking the scene, wearing my simple gray dress, feeling like a sacrifice being displayed before the altar. Kalen stood on a raised stone platform beside me, Commander Lyra a step behind his shoulder. Across the sea of heads I saw them, the Shadowfen pack, a dark blot of leather and fur. Thuron Blackwood stood at their front, his scarred face tilted up, a faint, cruel smile on his lips. Beside him was a mountain of a man, Dax, I presumed. His arms were like tree trunks, his neck thick, his eyes small and devoid of anything resembling thought, a pure instrument of destruction. A herald's trumpet cut through the murmuring crowd. Silence fell, heavy and expectant. Kalen stepped forward, his voice carrying without effort, cold and formal. "By ancient right, a challenge to the strength and unity of the ruling pack has been issued. The bloodright trials are called." He didn't look at me, but his words were for everyone. The royal pack accepts 3 trials, 1 champion from each pack that wishes to contest. The royal pack's champion will be Alara Vane. A roar went up from the crowd, part shock, part derision, part bloodthirsty excitement. I saw Leora in the throng, her face pale. I saw the calculating eyes of Lady Seraphine. I saw Thuron's smile widen. Kaelin continued over the din. The trials are thus: first, trial of the stone, a contest of strength and resilience. Second, trial of the stream, a test of cunning and survival. Third, trial of the summit, a challenge of will and endurance. The details of each will be revealed at its commencement. The trials commence at dawn tomorrow. He stepped back. The formalities were over. The sentence was passed. As the crowd began to churn and discuss, a figure broke from the Shadowfen group and shouldered his way toward the palace steps. It was Dax. He stopped directly below our balcony, his gaze locking not on Kaelin but on me. He didn't speak. He simply drew a thick finger slowly across his own throat, his meaning unmistakable, a promise carved in the air between us. Then he spat on the stones at the base of the steps, turned, and lumbered back to his alpha. The crowd saw it. A fresh wave of whispers erupted. Kaelin's hand closed around my upper arm, his grip firm. "Do not look at him," he murmured, his voice a low vibration. "He wants your fear, do not give him the satisfaction." But it was too late. The image was seared into my mind. The cold finality in Dax's eyes was worse than any of Thuron's verbal threats. This was not a game of politics to him, it was butcher's work. We withdrew into the palace, the heavy doors closing on the noise of the mob. In the sudden quiet of an antechamber, Kaelin turned to me, his expression grim. "The stone trial will be Dax. He is their champion. He will try to break you quickly to make a spectacle of it. What do I do?" My voice was steadier than I felt. "You survive. You use everything Lyra and I have taught you. He is strong, but he is slow, arrogant. He will underestimate you until it is too late." He paused. "But Alara, the trial of the stone is not just combat. The stone is you, your resilience. He will be allowed to strike you. You must withstand it." My blood turned to ice. "Strike me, how?" "Until you yield or cannot continue." The words were brutal in their simplicity. "The rules are ancient and cruel. The aim is to test the spirit's endurance against pain. Your healing knowledge, use it. Know where to take a blow to minimize damage. Know how to breathe through the pain. This is not about winning, it is about enduring." The rest of the day was a phantom stretch of time. I tried to eat, I tried to rest. I ran through pressure points and evasive maneuvers in my mind, but they felt like childish games against the coming reality of Dax's fists. As twilight bled into evening, a quiet knock came at my door. It was not Kaelin. It was Isolde, the sharp-eyed councilwoman. She slipped inside without invitation, her gaze sweeping the room before landing on me. "You look like you're preparing for your own funeral," she stated, not unkindly. "Isn't I?" She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Perhaps, but listen, Thuron didn't choose these trials at random. Stone, stream, summit. He's telling a story. He starts with crushing force, then he moves to drowning you, playing on your fear of water, no doubt. Finally, he strips everything away at the summit, leaving only will against the elements." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "He's not just trying to beat you, he's trying to reenact your own salvation in reverse and have you fail at each step. It's psychological warfare. Remember that. He's attacking your mind as much as your body." The insight was chilling. It made terrible sense. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the king sees your strength, but he is too close to your courage to see your fear," she said bluntly. "And fear is what Thuron will use. Do not let him narrate your story, Alara. Change the script." Before I could ask how, she was gone, a whisper of silk and warning. Her words haunted me. I stood again at the window, but now I didn't see the gardens. I saw the river. I felt the cold, the panic, the weight. Thuron wanted to take me back there. To make me break where I had once been strong. A resolve, cold and hard as the coming trial's namesake, settled in my chest. No, he didn't get to own that memory. That river was mine, that choice was mine. The fear was mine, but so was the strength it had forged. I didn't sleep. When the first hint of gray touched the sky, I was already dressed in the dark leathers Kaelin had given me. I braided my hair tightly, my movements calm, deliberate. The frantic bird of my heart was still there, but its wings were stilled by a strange, fatalistic calm. The arena at dawn was a bowl of shadows and anticipation. Thousands of faces crowded the stone tiers, their breath fogging in the cold air. In the royal box, Kaelin sat, his face a mask of stone. Commander Lyra stood rigid beside him. Thuron Blackwood occupied a box opposite, looking like a satisfied carrion bird. In the center of the sand, waiting, was Dax. He wore only loincloth and leather bracers, his massive body a landscape of muscle and old violence. In his hand he held not a sword but a short, thick cudgel of dark wood. A gong sounded, deep and resonant. I walked out onto the sand. The noise of the crowd was a distant roar in my ears. My world narrowed to the circle of earth, the hulking man before me, and the cold, clear purpose in my mind: endure. An old judge, his face wrinkled like old bark, stood between us. Trial of the stone. He announced, his voice cracking across the arena. The champion of Shadowfen may strike. The champion of Thorn may not strike back, only defend, evade, or endure. The trial ends when one yields, is rendered unconscious, or steps outside the circle. Begin. Dax didn't wait. He came at me with a speed that belied his size, the cudgel whistling in a horizontal arc toward my ribs. There was no finesse, only obliterating force. I didn't try to block it. I dropped, the wind of its passing ruffling my hair. I rolled as his follow-up kick came at my head, coming up several feet away. The crowd gasped, then cheered for the spectacle, not for me. He snarled, annoyed. He advanced again, more carefully now. I circled, keeping distance, my eyes on his shoulders, his hips. He feinted high, then swung low at my legs. I jumped, the cudgel grazing my boot heel. The impact sent a shock up my leg, a warning of the power behind it. He was hurting me, using his bulk to shrink the circle. I had to move to make him work. I darted in, not to attack, but to force him to pivot. As he turned, I saw it, the slight favoring of his left knee, an old injury. I had my first piece of information, but he was learning too. On my next dodge, he didn't follow through with the cudgel. Instead, he dropped it and lunged, his arms wrapping around me in a bear hug that crushed the air from my lungs. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. The smell of him, sweat and aggression, filled my senses. "Little mouse," he grunted into my ear, his breath hot. "Time to squeak." He lifted me off my feet and threw me bodily across the sand. I hit the ground hard, the impact driving what little air I had left from my body. Stars exploded behind my eyes. A groan was torn from my lips, the crowd roared. On his platform, Thuron leaned forward, his smile vicious. I pushed myself to my hands and knees, coughing, my vision swimming. "Breathe from your gut," Lyra's voice commanded in my head. I forced a breath, then another. I got to my feet, my body protesting. Dax picked up his cudgel again, hefting it. "Stay down next time," he growled. "It'll hurt less." He came again. I was slower now, my ribs shrieking with every movement. I couldn't evade forever, he knew it. He backed me toward the edge of the circle, cutting off my angles. Then he swung, not to maim but to end. A tremendous overhead blow aimed at my collarbone, meant to shatter it and drive me to the ground. I couldn't dodge completely, so I didn't. I turned my body at the last second, taking the crushing impact on the meat of my shoulder and upper arm, not the bone. Agony, white-hot and blinding, erupted. My arm went numb. I cried out, stumbling backward, but I stayed on my feet. I stayed in the circle. Dax stared, surprised I was still standing. The crowd had fallen silent. Through the haze of pain, I saw his confusion, his arrogance. He expected me to fall. I had changed the script. He raised the cudgel for a final, furious strike. And as he did, he planted his weight squarely on that old, weak left knee. It was the only opening I would get. As the cudgel descended, I didn't try to avoid it. I dropped to the ground, not away from him, but toward him. I swept my good leg in a desperate, scything arc, not at his standing leg but at his bad knee. My foot connected with the side of his joint with a sickening pop. Dax bellowed, not in anger but in genuine, shocked pain. His leg buckled. The cudgel's blow went wide, slamming into the sand beside my head. He crashed to one knee, clutching his leg. The arena was utterly silent. I staggered to my feet, my left arm hanging useless, fiery agony radiating from my shoulder. Dax was still down, roaring in pain and fury, trying to rise. The old judge stepped forward, his eyes wide. He looked from Dax, incapacitated, to me, standing battered but unbowed within the circle. The rules were clear. The striker had been neutralized not by a counterstrike but by his own imbalance exploited. The trial of the stone concludes, the judge announced, his voice uncertain. The champion of Thorn endures. The silence broke into a tumultuous, confused roar. It wasn't cheers of victory. It was the sound of a story unexpectedly rewritten. I didn't look at the crowd. I didn't look at Thuron's surely livid face. My eyes found the royal box. Kalen was on his feet, his stone mask shattered, raw, undisguised relief blazing in his eyes. I had endured the stone. But as I was helped from the sand, my body screaming, I knew the true message had been sent. Thuron's first move had failed. His hammer had broken against something he didn't understand. And the next trial was the stream, the water, my domain. As darkness crept into the edges of my vision, one thought burned clear: the game had just changed. And for the first time I saw a flicker of doubt in the monster's eyes, not of fear, but of the beginning of respect. Chapter 9: Whispers in the Deep. The world returned in fragments, the sharp, clean scent of poultices, the soft give of a mattress beneath my battered body, the low murmur of voices that hushed as consciousness reclaimed me. I was back in the Royal Medical Wing, but this time I was not an anonymous patient. Healers moved around me with a new deference, their touches gentle, their eyes wide. My left shoulder and upper arm were tightly bound, a cold compress numbing the deep, throbbing ache. Every breath sent a spike of pain through my ribs. I felt like a vase that had been dropped and hastily glued back together. The door opened and Kalen entered. He dismissed the healers with a glance. In the quiet room, the force of his presence was almost overwhelming. He pulled a chair to my bedside and sat, his storm-gray eyes sweeping over my bandages, the bruise already blossoming on my cheek. "You broke his kneecap," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and something darker. "The healers say it will be months before Dax walks without a limp." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry parchment. He reached for a pitcher, poured water into a cup, and held it to my lips, supporting my head. The gesture was so intimate, so at odds with the King of Thorns' reach, that I froze for a second before drinking. "I didn't mean to break it," I rasped, sinking back. "I just aimed for the weakness." "I know." A faint, grim smile touched his lips. "That's what makes it brilliant. You used his own strength, his own momentum against him. Thuron is apoplectic. He claims you violated the spirit of the trial. And what do you say?" "I say the spirit of the trial was endurance. You endured, he did not." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "But Alara, the next trial is the stream. You know what that means. The water, a cold deeper than any compress settled in my stomach. He'll use the river, my fear." "Yes." "The trial will be held at the King's Lake, where the Serpent's Run feeds into it. It's deep, cold, and they will find a way to make it about drowning." His gaze held mine, relentless. "Isolde was right, he is telling a story. He wants to break you where you were once strong." I closed my eyes, the memory of the churning brown water, the suffocating darkness of the carriage, rushing back. My hands trembled against the sheets. "I don't know if I can go into the water again, not like that." "You don't have a choice," he said, not unkindly but with finality. "But you do have an advantage he does not expect." I opened my eyes. "What advantage?" "You are a healer. You understand the body under duress. You know how long you can hold your breath. You know what cold does to the muscles, to the mind. You know the signs of panic and how to fight them. He placed a hand over my uninjured one on the blanket. His palm was warm, grounding. This trial is not about strength, it is about knowledge. And survival. He expects a frightened girl. Show him a scholar of survival. For the next 2 days, I was trapped in a different kind of training. Confined to the infirmary, I studied. Kalen brought me scrolls on aquatic survival, on the physiology of breath holding. Commander Lyra came and drilled me on mental exercises, focusing on a single point, regulating breath, visualizing success. But the most haunting visit came from Leora. She brought me a strengthening tea, her expression somber. "The Shadowfen healers are furious," she said, sitting beside me. "They say what you did to Dax was vicious, unbecoming." I flinched. I was defending myself. "I know," she said quickly, "but that's not how they're spinning it. They're calling you the River Witch, saying you used unnatural cunning. That you fight like a cornered animal, not a noble champion." She hesitated. "It's getting into the city, Alara. People are divided. Some cheer for you, others are afraid of you. River Witch, the name was a brand meant to scare. But a strange part of me held on to it. A witch had power. A witch was not a victim. The day before the trial of the stream, Kalen arranged for me to be taken to the edge of the King's Lake at dusk, when no one else was around. The water was a vast, placid sheet of mercury under the twilight sky, reflecting the first stars. Where the serpent's run entered, there was a line of churning current, a whisper of the river's violence. "Go in," Kalen said quietly, standing on the pebbled shore behind me. "Just to your knees, remember it without the panic." My heart hammered against my bruised ribs. The mere sight of the dark water made my palms sweat, but I took a step, then another. The cold water soaked through my boots, my trousers climbing to my calves. It was icy, but it was not violent, it was not rising, it was just water. I stood there, breathing slowly, forcing my muscles to unclench. The memory was there, the terror just beneath the surface, but I held it at bay. This was different, I was in control. "Good," Kalen's voice came, a steady rumble from the shore. "Now remember this feeling. This is just water. It is a thing. You have faced it and won. You can do it again." I stayed until the cold was bone deep and the last of the light had faded. When I walked out shivering, he was waiting with a thick wool cloak. He wrapped it around my shoulders, his hands lingering for a moment. "Tomorrow," he said, his face close to mine in the dark, "they will try to drown the legend. Don't let them. Remember who you are. The girl who commands the water, not the one who fears it." The morning of the trial dawned with a thick, clinging fog that rolled off the lake, swallowing sound. The crowds gathered on the shores were spectral shapes, their voices muffled. A long, narrow pier jutted out into the mist. At its end, the judge stood, along with Thuron Blackwood and a woman I didn't recognize, slender, with hair the color of seaweed and eyes that held the flat calm of deep water. Vesa, I'd heard. Shadowfen's swimmer, rumored to be able to hold her breath longer than a seal. Kalen walked with me to the start of the pier. "The trial is simple in description," he murmured. A token is placed on the lake bottom in the deep channel where the current from the Serpent's Run is strongest. First to retrieve it wins, but Alara, it is not a race, it is a trap. They will have divers in the water. They will try to keep you down. My mouth went dry. That's allowed. Interference is part of the cunning of the stream. His hand gripped my good shoulder. "Use your size, your agility in the water. You are not a brute force swimmer, be an eel. Be a shadow, and if you cannot get the token, then ensure she cannot either." The judge's voice cut through the fog. "Champions approach." I walked down the pier, the planks wet and slippery beneath my feet. Vesa fell into step beside me, a slight, contemptuous smile on her lips. "The River Witch," she cooed, her voice like water over smooth stones. "Let us see if your witchcraft works beneath the surface." At the end of the pier, the judge held up a heavy iron ring, attached to a long, thin rope that disappeared into the murky water. "The token is fixed to the bottom, 20 feet down in the current's path. You may surface for breath as needed. First to bring the ring to me wins. Begin." Vesa didn't hesitate. She dove, a sleek, silent arc that barely made a splash. I followed, the shock of the cold, a familiar, biting enemy. The world became a green, murky twilight. I kicked down, following the taut line of the rope. The current from the river inlet was a palpable force trying to push me sideways. I saw Vesa below, a dark shape already near the bottom, her hands reaching for the glint of metal. Then other shapes detached from the gloom. Two large, powerful divers, members of the Shadowfen pack, swam between me and the token. One turned to face me, his intention clear: be an eel, I didn't swim at him. I let the current carry me slightly past, then twisted, kicking off the sandy bottom to dart around his flank. He was stronger, but I was quicker in the tight space. The other diver moved to block me. I exhaled a stream of bubbles, creating a brief screen, and changed direction again. But Vesa had the ring. She was tugging it free from its mooring. Panic threatened. I had failed. Then Kaelin's words: if you cannot get the token, ensure she cannot either. I wasn't here to win a race. I was here to survive Thuron's story. Instead of going for Vesa, I swam to the rope that anchored the ring. I wrapped my good arm around it and pulled with all my might, not upward but sideways into the strongest part of the current from the serpent's run. The rope went taut. Vesa, surprised, lost her grip on the ring. It tumbled from her hands and the current snatched it, sending it skittering along the lake bottom, away from the divers, away from her, into a forest of thick, deep-water weeds. Vesa's calm eyes flashed with fury. She shot me a venomous look and turned to pursue the ring. The divers, confused, milled for a moment before following her. My lungs were burning, spots dancing before my eyes. I kicked for the surface, broke through with a ragged gasp. The fog was thinner up here. I could see Thuron on the pier, his face a mask of thunderous rage. Kaelin stood rigid, his gaze locked on the water. I filled my lungs and dove again. Below, a chaotic scene unfolded. Vesa was tangled in the weeds, desperately trying to extricate the ring. One diver was trying to help her, the other was turning back to find me. I didn't have much time. I swam not for the ring, but for the diver coming for me. As he reached for me, I didn't evade. I let him grab my injured arm. Agony shot through me, white and blinding. Using his own grip as an anchor, I curled my body and kicked him squarely in the chest with both feet, propelling myself backward, out of his grasp and directly toward the tangled weeds. I crashed into Vesa. She flailed, losing more precious breath. Our eyes met in the green gloom, her fury, my desperate resolve. I didn't fight her. I reached past her, my fingers closing not around the ring, but around the thick stem of the weed it was caught on. I pulled, tearing the entire clump, ring and all, free from the mud. Holding the writhing mass of vegetation, I kicked for the surface with the last dregs of my strength. Vesa, enraged, grabbed my ankle, trying to drag me back down. I kicked wildly, connecting with her face. Her grip loosened. I exploded through the surface, choking, gasping, holding aloft a dripping mass of weeds with the iron ring clearly visible, tangled at its heart. The judge, peering over the pier, stared. The crowd murmured. Vesa surfaced a moment later, empty-handed, blood trickling from her nose. I swam the short distance to the pier, my limbs like lead. With my last ounce of strength, I flung the clump of weeds, ring and all, onto the planks at the judge's feet. Silence, then a smattering of applause that grew into a confused but undeniable roar. The judge looked from the tangled, dripping mess to me, then to Vesa. The token is retrieved by the champion of Thorn. It wasn't a clean victory. It was a muddy, desperate, cunning mess, but it was a victory. As I was hauled onto the pier, collapsing onto the wet wood, I looked up at Kaelin. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes blazed with a fierce, triumphant pride that warmed me more than any blanket ever could. Thuron's story of drowning had been sabotaged. His stream had been mudded. And the river witch had just proven she didn't need to breathe water. She only needed to be smarter than those who hid beneath it. 2 trials down, 1 to go, and the summit awaited, where there would be no water to hide in, no tricks to play. Only will against the sky. Chapter 10, The Shadow's Edge Victory. It turned out tasted like lake water and blood. The triumph on the pier was short-lived, swallowed by the immediate, grinding aftermath. My body was a tapestry of fresh pain over old bruises, the deep ache in my shoulder, the fiery protest of my ribs, the new, cold exhaustion in every muscle from the fight in the water. They carried me back to the infirmary on a litter, the cheers of the crowd a distant, meaningless roar in my waterclogged ears. This time the healers worked in a tense, focused silence. The mood had shifted. Before I had been a curiosity. Now I was a player. A dangerous one, the river witch who had broken a kneecap with cunning and stolen a victory from the depths. Their touches were still professional, but their eyes held a new wariness, a flicker of something like fear. Kalen did not come immediately. I learned later he was locked in a furious council session. Thuron Blackwood was contesting the second trial's outcome, claiming my method of retrieval, bringing up the weeds, violated the spirit of the challenge. The judges were deliberating. The fate of my victory and the momentum of the trials hung in the balance. It was Isolde who slipped into my room as twilight fell, her expression grim. "The judges have ruled," she said without preamble. "The win stands. A token retrieved is a token retrieved. Thuron is displeased. But he has accepted it for now." She perched on the edge of a chair, her keen eyes assessing my bandaged form. "You've made it to the third trial, Ilara, the summit. No one, least of all Thuron, expected that. He is no longer trying to humiliate the king through you. He is now personally invested in breaking you." "What is the summit?" My voice was a rasp. "The details won't be announced until dawn before the trial, but the name tells the story. It's always held at the Crown's Tooth, that jagged peak in the royal hunting grounds. It's a test of pure will, exposure, endurance. Often it involves a night on the mountain with minimal gear. Sometimes it's a race, sometimes it's just lasting." She leaned forward. "But this time, with you involved, he will make it about your greatest weakness, not your body, your mind, your spirit." "The cold," I whispered, "the memory of the rivers bite as fresh as the lake S. And the isolation, the dark, the feeling of being hunted." Isolde's voice was low, urgent. "He will try to strip away everything you've used so far, your cunning, your agility, your support. He will reduce you to a terrified, alone, freezing girl on a mountain. That is the story he wants to end with." The picture she painted was a desolate one. I could see it. The howling wind, the impenetrable dark, the creeping, soul-deep cold. A shiver that had nothing to do with my injuries ran through me. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, looking at this sharp, enigmatic woman who owed me nothing. She smiled, a thin, humorless curve of her lips. "Because the kingdom is bored with brutes like Thuron. It needs new stories, and yours is fascinating." She stood to leave, rest. "The king will be here soon. And remember, Ilara, on that mountain all you will have is what you carry inside. Make sure it's enough." She was right. Kalen came later, after the moon had risen. He looked exhausted, shadows like bruises under his eyes, but his gaze was alert, burning with a focused intensity. "The summit is in 2 days," he confirmed, pulling a chair close. "They've agreed on the format. It will be a night ascent. You and Thuron's final champion, a tracker named Rook, will be taken to the base of the Crown's Tooth at dusk. You will each be given a knife, a water skin, a single blanket, and a flint. The first to reach the summit and light a signal fire wins. A night ascent. With minimal gear, against a shadowfen tracker, a man bred for wilderness and darkness. It was a death sentence dressed as a trial. Rook is not like Dax or Vesa," Kalen continued, his voice grave. "He is quiet, patient. He doesn't fight with rage, but with persistence. He is a shadow. He will not confront you directly. He will harry you. He will steal your gear if he can. He will use the terrain and the darkness to break your nerve." I closed my eyes, trying to quell the rising tide of despair. "I can't out-track a tracker on his own mountain." "No," Kalen agreed. "You cannot, so you must not play his game." He reached out and took my good hand, his grip firm. "You are a healer, you know this land's plants. You know what can sustain, what can heal, what can distract. Rook knows how to hunt game, you must know how to use the mountain itself. He spent the next hour drilling me not on combat but on botany, on which mosses held water, on which roots could be eaten, on where to find the driest wood for a fire in damp conditions, on the poisonous berries that looked like edible ones. It was a different kind of warfare. He will expect you to panic, to run, to make mistakes in the dark, Kalen said, his face close to mine in the lamplight. Do the opposite, move slowly, deliberately, use the first part of the night not to climb but to prepare, secure your water, find a safe, concealed spot to rest if you need to. Let him waste energy searching for you. The idea was revolutionary. Survival wasn't about beating the other champion. It was about outlasting the mountain and his expectations. The day before the summit trial was a strange, suspended day. I was released from the infirmary, though every movement was still a symphony of pain. I walked the palace gardens, trying to build my strength, feeling the eyes of servants and guards upon me. The division Isolde mentioned was palpable. Some nodded with respect. Others looked away quickly as if I were cursed. Leora found me by a frozen fountain. They're saying you bargained with spirits of the deep for your victory, she said, her tone unreadable. That's why you brought up the weeds, that you're not natural. I gave a tired laugh that hurt my ribs. I wish I had, it would have been easier. She didn't smile. Be careful on that mountain, Alara. Rook, he has a reputation. Things go missing in the woods when he's around, not just game, people. Her warning hung in the cold air. That evening, as I was checking the contents of the small pack I'd been allowed, a sharp knife, a water skin, a thin wool blanket, a flint, a small wrapped parcel was delivered by a palace child who scurried away without a word. Inside, folded in oiled cloth, was a compact, beautifully made tinderbox far superior to the basic flint, and tucked beside it a tiny vial of clear liquid with a label in precise script: wolfsbane extract, 1 drop paralyses, 2 kill, for predators only. There was no note, but I knew. It was from Isolde. It was a weapon, a silent, lethal one. It changed everything. It was no longer just about survival. It was about having the means to end the threat, to kill. My healer's soul recoiled. Poisons were for ending suffering in terminal illness, not for this. But Isolde's words echoed, for predators only. That night sleep was impossible. I stood at my window, looking north towards the dark, jagged silhouette of the crown's tooth against the starry sky. In my mind, I wasn't facing a mountain. I was facing a choice. I could play the game with the tools Kalen had given me: knowledge, patience, cunning, or I could take the weapon Isolde had offered and change the game entirely. One path was hard, uncertain, but clean. The other was dark, sure, and would stain my hands and my soul forever. I looked at the tiny vial on my table, catching the moonlight, a mere ounce of liquid holding a world of moral collapse. Thuron wanted to break my spirit on the mountain, but the true test, I realized, wasn't the cold or the dark or the tracker. The true summit was within me. It was the peak of my own conscience, and I had to decide what I was willing to sacrifice to reach the top: my life or my principles. As the first hint of dawn tinged the sky, I made my choice. I opened my pack, my hands steady. I placed the superior tinderbox inside. Then I picked up the vial of wolfsbane. I held it for a long, breathless moment, feeling its terrible potential. Then I walked to the fireplace and, without a second thought, poured the clear liquid onto the cold ashes. The choice was made. I would face the mountain, the cold, and the shadow named Rook with nothing but my wits, my knowledge, and the fragile, stubborn flame of who I was. I was Alara Vane, healer, river witch, survivor, but I would not be a killer. The summit would have to break me on its own terms. I would not break myself first. Chapter 11, The Crown's Tooth. Dusk on the day of the third trial was a somber, purple affair. A heavy silence had fallen over the palace, thicker than the fog from the lake. This was it, the final act, the summit. I stood in the main courtyard, the small pack feeling absurdly light on my back. Kalen was there along with Commander Lyra and a contingent of royal guards. Opposite us, Thuron Blackwood and his scarred pack surrounded a lean, silent man, Rook. He was unremarkable at first glance, average height, dark hair tied back, clothing the color of forest shadows, but his eyes, they were the flat, empty gray of river stones, absorbing light and giving nothing back. He watched me without blinking, a predator assessing strange prey. No speeches were made. The judge, the same old man from the first trial, simply gestured to two waiting horses. "You will be taken to the base of the crown's tooth. The trial begins when you dismount. The rules are simple: reach the summit, light the beacon fire. First to have their flame seen from the palace watchtower wins. Interference is permitted, but killing results in immediate disqualification and execution." His eyes lingered on Rook, then on me. "The mountain is the judge now." I mounted my horse, my injuries protesting. Kalen stepped up beside me, placing a hand on my horse's neck. He didn't look at me, but spoke to the space between the horse's ears, his voice so low only I could hear it. "Remember your training. The mountain is not your enemy. It is your terrain. Use it. He will try to frighten you. Do not give him the satisfaction. Your will is the flint. Strike it against this challenge and make a spark." He finally met my eyes. In the dying light, his were the color of a gathering storm, full of unspoken things. Then he stepped back, his face settling into the impenetrable mask of the king. The ride north was a journey into another world. The manicured gardens gave way to wild forest, then to rocky, rising foothills. The air grew sharper, colder. By the time we reached the designated starting point, a small, stony clearing at the mountain's foot, full night had fallen. The moon was a sliver, offering little light. The crown's tooth loomed above us, a monstrous black fang against the star-dusted sky. Rook and I dismounted. The handlers took the horses and vanished back down the trail, leaving us in a silence so profound I could hear the blood rushing in my own ears. The judge, who had followed on his own horse, lit a single torch and planted it in the center of the clearing. "When this torch burns out," he intoned, "the trial begins. Mayor will be equal to the mountain." He retreated to a watchful distance. Rook immediately melted into the deeper shadows at the clearing's edge, becoming one with the night. I forced myself to stand still, to breathe, to listen to Kalen's voice in my head. "The mountain is your terrain." The torch sputtered, the flame dancing in the cold breeze. My heart hammered, a frantic counterrhythm to the slow, inevitable consumption of the wood. I focused on the lessons. Secure water first. A faint trickling sound came from the north, a stream from the snowmelt higher up. Good. The torch flame guttered, shrank to a blue ember, and died. Darkness, absolute and consuming, crashed down. I didn't move. I counted to 100 in my head, my ears straining. I heard nothing from Rook, not a rustle, not a shifted stone. He was a ghost. Moving with deliberate, silent slowness, I turned toward the sound of the water. I didn't try to climb yet. I felt my way, my hands outstretched, my feet testing each step. It took an agonizingly long time to find the stream, a icy ribbon over smooth stones. I filled my waterskin, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness. Now shelter, not to sleep, but to hide, to observe. Kalen's advice: let him waste energy searching. I found a tumble of large boulders a short way from the stream, with a narrow crevice behind them. I squeezed in, pulling my thin blanket around my shoulders. The cold seeped through the wool, through my leathers, into my bones. I began to shiver almost immediately. I waited. Time lost all meaning in the dark and the cold. It was a void, punctuated only by the howl of the wind picking up as it sliced between the higher peaks. My mind tried to conjure horrors, Rook's stone-gray eyes appearing in the crevice, his hands closing around my throat. I fought the images with the litany of plants Kalen had taught me: silverleaf moss for insulation, frostberry vines, edible but bitter, kingsful for numbing pain, a sound, not the wind, a soft, deliberate click of stone against stone about 30 paces to my left. He was moving, searching. He was good, I never would have heard it if I'd been blundering up the slope in panic. He passed my hiding place without pause. I heard his progress fade as he moved higher, following what was likely a game trail. He was assuming I would rush. He was wrong. When I was sure he was well ahead, I emerged. The sliver of moon gave just enough ghostly light to see the jagged outlines of the terrain. I began my own ascent, but not on his trail. I moved laterally, looking for a different route, steeper, more treacherous, but less obvious. The climb was a special kind of agony. My injured shoulder screamed with every pull, my ribs stabbed with each labored breath in the thin air. I used my healer's knowledge of the body to move efficiently, to distribute weight, to find handholds that wouldn't torque my damaged joints. I was slow, painfully slow, but I was steady. After what felt like hours, I found the first sign of Rook. A footprint in a patch of damp earth pointed uphill. He was still ahead, still climbing, but I also found something else. A snapped branch at chest height, the break fresh. He was marking a trail, for himself, or for me to follow, a trap it had to be. I changed direction again, angling away from the marked path, scrambling up a near-vertical rock face using cracks and tenacious, wind-stunted shrubs. It was exhausting, terrifying work, but it felt right. I was thinking, not reacting. Near what I guessed was the halfway point, the wind became a furious, shrieking entity. It stole warmth, it battered my balance, it drove icy needles of sleet into my face. I took shelter in the lee of a massive boulder, huddling with my blanket over my head, trying to rub feeling back into my fingers. I was so cold my tears felt warm on my cheeks. Then, a voice, so close it seemed to come from inside my own skull. "You're smarter than he said." I froze, my blood turning to ice colder than the mountain. Rook's voice was a dry rustle like dead leaves. Most run, they make noise, they are easy. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "You are quiet, you are annoying." I didn't answer, I didn't move, I held my breath. A stone about the size of my fist clattered down the rock face just to my right, a distraction, a test. "The king thinks you have strength," the voice whispered, now seeming to come from above me. "I think you are just stubborn. Stubborn things break loudest." I heard a soft scuff of leather on stone. He was circling. He knew where I was. My hiding spot was now a trap. I had two choices, stay and be found, or run and be chased. I chose a third. In one fluid motion, I shrugged off my pack, grabbed my knife, and rolled out from behind the boulder, not away from the sound, but towards where I'd last heard it. I came up in a crouch, knife held low. The sleet stung my eyes. I saw a darker shadow detach itself from the rocks 10 feet away. Rook, he hadn't expected me to charge. It gave me a half-second of advantage. I didn't lunge at him. I threw my pack at his face. He batted it aside instinctively, but in that moment I was already moving past him, not to fight, but to scramble up the slope he had just come down. I was above him now. He let out a soft hiss of surprise and spun. I didn't look back. I climbed, using a surge of pure adrenaline to propel me over an outcrop onto a narrow, winding goat path I'd spotted from below. I ran, my breath sobbing in my throat, the wind tearing at me. I heard him behind me, his pursuit silent but relentless. He was faster. He knew these paths, he was going to catch me. The path ended at a sheer cliff face curving away into the darkness, a dead end. Panic clawed at my throat. I was cornered. I turned my back to the cliff, my knife held out. Rook emerged from the path, stopping a few yards away. His stone-gray eyes were visible now, reflecting the faint starlight. He held his own knife low and ready. "No more running, little witch," he said, his voice devoid of triumph. It was just a fact. Yield or fall. My mind raced. I couldn't beat him in a fight. I was injured, exhausted, outmatched. The cliff was behind me. The mountain had won. Then my healer's eyes, trained to see detail in the failing light of a sick room, caught something. Just to the left of the path's end, where the cliff face met the steep slope, there was a darker patch. Not rock, an opening, a crack, a cave, or a deep crevice. It was a gamble, a terrible one. I lowered my knife slightly, letting my shoulders slump in a posture of defeat. "I yield," I whispered, the words torn away by the wind. Rook took a step forward, his expression unchanging. As he did, I threw my knife not at him but at the ground at his feet. It was a distraction, a child's trick. He glanced down instinctively. That was all I needed. I dove sideways, not away from him but toward the dark crack in the cliff. I shoved myself into the opening, squeezing through a narrow gap of cold, damp stone. It was a tight fit, scraping my injured shoulder raw. I forced myself deeper into utter blackness. Rook's hand shot into the opening, grasping at my ankle. His fingers brushed my boot. I kicked wildly, connecting with something, and pulled myself completely inside. I was in a small, shallow cave, barely more than a pocket in the rock, but it was shelter, and the entrance was too narrow for a man of his build to follow quickly. I heard his frustrated snarl from outside, then silence. He was waiting. He could wait all night, but I couldn't. The cold in this stone tomb was even deeper. My shivering was becoming uncontrollable, the first signs of true hypothermia. I had escaped him, but the mountain was now killing me slowly. I fumbled in the dark with my flint and the tinderbox Isolde had given me. My hands were clumsy, numb. It took a dozen tries before a tiny spark caught on the charcloth. I nurtured it with my breath, adding tiny twigs I'd stuffed in my pocket from the lower slopes. A feeble, wavering flame grew, no bigger than a coin, but it was light, it was heat. I hunched over it, my blanket around us both, my face so close I could feel the blessed warmth. It was my spark, my will against the darkness. Outside, the wind screamed. Rook was still out there, the summit was still far above. But in this tiny, desperate pocket of light and warmth, I had won a small, vital victory. I had not yielded, I had not broken. And as I fed the fragile flame, a new, grim realization settled over me. This wasn't just about reaching the top anymore. It was about which of us would still be alive to try when the sun finally rose. Chapter 12. The summit's price. The tiny flame in my stone coffin was a defiant, flickering lie. It promised warmth it couldn't deliver, light that revealed only the close, damp walls of my prison. The cold was a living thing, slithering through the cracks in the rock, coiling around my bones. My shivering had become a constant, violent tremor I could not control. The edge of my mind grew soft, fuzzy. Sleep, the deep, cold sleep of the mountain, whispered seductively. No, the command came from a deep, stubborn well inside me. I pinched the skin on my wrist hard. The sharp pain brought a moment of clarity. I couldn't stay here. The fire would consume my meager fuel and die. The cold would finish its work. I had to move, but moving meant leaving the illusion of safety. It meant facing Rook, who was certainly waiting just beyond the narrow entrance, a patient spider by a frozen web. I listened. The wind still howled its ancient dirge. No sound of movement. Had he given up? No, a hunter like Rook did not give up. He was conserving energy, letting the mountain do his work. My mind, sluggish with cold, turned over my options. They were pitifully few. I could not fight him, I could not outrun him, I had to outthink him. Kaelin's words, use the mountain. I looked at my pathetic fire. An idea, desperate and mad, began to form. It was not a warrior's plan, it was a healer's, a poisoner's. But I had poured my poison out, but the mountain has its own. I remembered the lessons, frostberry vines, edible but bitter. The berries cause nausea, cramps. The smoke from the burning leaves disorients, causes blurred vision. I had no frostberry. But in my frantic scramble into the crevice, my hands had brushed against vegetation growing in a seam of dirt near the entrance. In the faint firelight I now looked. Thin, wiry stems with small, waxy, gray-green leaves, stonecress. Not poisonous, but when burned, its smoke was thick, acrid, a potent irritant to the eyes and lungs. It was not a weapon, it was a tool. My hands, numb and clumsy, gathered as much of the stonecress as I could reach. I added it carefully to my tiny fire. Instead of flame, it produced a billowing, choking cloud of white-gray smoke that filled the small space instantly. I coughed, my eyes streaming, but I forced myself to breathe through a fold of my blanket. When I had a dense, rolling bank of smoke, I took a deep, final breath of marginally cleaner air, grabbed my pack and blanket, and launched myself backward out of the crevice. I erupted into the night in a cascading plume of smoke, like a dragon from its lair. The wind caught the cloud, spreading it into a thick, blinding screen. I didn't hesitate, I didn't look for Rook. I turned and ran, not up the main path, but along a narrow, treacherous ledge that skirted the cliff face, moving laterally, staying within the dissipating smoke screen as long as I could. I heard a choked cough behind me. Rook caught in the cloud. A surge of fierce satisfaction cut through my exhaustion. It wouldn't stop him for long, but it would slow him. It would make his eyes water, his vision swim. For a tracker who relied on keen sight in the dark, it was a significant handicap. The ledge petered out into a steep, scree-covered slope. Loose stones shifted treacherously under my boots. Climbing it was a nightmare of sliding, scrambling effort. Every muscle burned. The air grew thinner, each breath a desperate gasp that did nothing to satisfy my starving lungs, but I climbed. I climbed because there was no other option. I lost track of time. The world narrowed to the next handhold, the next foothold, the next ragged inhalation. The sleet had turned to a fine, driving snow that crusted on my lashes and stung my face. Finally, the slope began to level. I collapsed onto a small, flat plateau, my body spent. I had to rest just for a moment. I forced myself to sit up, to look around. I was near the peak. I could feel it in the punishing wind, in the vast, starry emptiness above. The crown's toothed summit was a jagged silhouette against the sky, maybe 100 vertical feet above me, and there, in the center of the plateau, was the beacon. A simple iron brazier on a stone pedestal, filled with dry, resinous wood and kindling. The finish line, but between me and it, rising from a shadow, was Rook. He looked wrong. One eye was squeezed shut, red and streaming from the smoke. A thin trail of blood marked a cut on his temple from a fall, perhaps, but his stone-gray eye was fixed on me, and in it burned a cold, pure hatred I had not seen before. I had not just evaded him, I had humiliated him with tricks. "No more tricks, witch," he growled, his voice raw. He held his knife, but he didn't advance. He stood guard before the brazier. "You want to light it? Come through me." I pushed myself to my feet, my legs trembling. I had no knife. I'd lost it at the crevice. I had nothing but my empty hands, my empty pack, and a body on the verge of collapse. This was it, Thuron's final story, not a battle of skill, but of sheer, brutal will. He had forced me to the summit, and now he would break me before the prize. I could yield, I could sink to my knees and admit defeat, save what was left of my strength. Survive. I looked past Rook at the brazier, at the unlit beacon. I thought of Kaelin's face on the balcony, the pride in his eyes when I emerged from the lake. I thought of the old guard's words. We'd follow a king. I thought of my own choice in the river, the choice that had started it all. I had not come this far to yield. "All right," I said, my voice a broken thing on the wind. "No more tricks." I didn't charge him, I walked. Slowly, painfully, each step an agony of cold and fatigue, I walked toward him. He watched me, wary, confused by this direct approach. When I was within arm's reach, he lunged, a swift, efficient strike aimed to disable my good arm. I didn't try to block it. I turned my body, letting the blade slice through the leather of my sleeve, a line of fire across my forearm, but the motion brought me inside his guard. My hands, healer's hands trained for precision, shot out, not to strike, not to punch. My thumb drove hard into the pressure point just below his collarbone, the one Kaelin had shown me to stun, to numb. At the same time, my other hand, fingers curled, jammed into the nerve cluster at the junction of his neck and shoulder. Rook grunted, his arm going momentarily slack. It wasn't enough to drop him. He was too strong, too hardened, but it was enough to make him stagger back half a step. That half step was all the opening I needed. I dove past him, not at him, but at the stone pedestal of the beacon. I hit the ground at its base, my fingers scrabbling for my flint and tinderbox inside my pack. Rook recovered with a snarl of rage. He turned, his knife coming up for a final, downward thrust. My numb fingers struck the flint. A spark flew onto the charcloth. It glowed. I blew on it, a desperate, prayerful breath. The knife descended. The kindling in the brazier, dry as a bone and soaked in pine pitch, caught with a soft whoomp. A tiny, golden flame leaped to life. The knife stopped, its point an inch from my back. Silence save for the hungry crackle of the newborn fire and the shriek of the wind. I rolled over, looking up. Rook stood frozen, his face a mask of stunned fury. He looked from the fire to me, to the distant, dark shape of the palace far, far below, where a watchtower would now see a new star winking on the mountaintop. The trial was over. I had lit the beacon. I lay in the snow, the warmth of the growing fire barely reaching me, and I did not feel triumph. I felt only a vast, hollow exhaustion. I had won. But the cost was written in the blood on my arm, the deep cold in my marrow, the ghost of the knife that had almost pierced my heart. Rook stared at the flame for a long moment, the hatred in his eyes slowly banked by the cold reality of defeat. Without a word, he sheathed his knife, turned, and began the long, slow descent down the mountain, a shadow swallowed by the greater dark. Alone on the summit, with the fire roaring against the night, I finally understood. The victory wasn't in lighting the beacon. It was in choosing to walk toward the knife. It was in reaching the summit not as a warrior, but as myself. Broken, bleeding, stubborn, alive, the river which had climbed the mountain, and she had not been broken, she had, against all odds, won. But as the cold began to recede and feeling returned in painful, prickling waves, a new, more terrifying thought arose. What happened now, after the last trial was won? What did the kingdom do with a common healer who had defeated its most savage challengers? The game was over. But my life as a piece on the board was only just beginning, and the king who had placed his bet on me was waiting in the valley below, where the real world, with all its political storms, was just waking up. Chapter 13, The Aftermath of Dawn. They found me at first light. I was no longer by the beacon. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cold, having been held at bay, rushed back in with a vengeance. I had crawled to the lee of the summit's highest rock, a pathetic, shivering creature wrapped in a frost-stiffened blanket. My consciousness was a flickering candle, guttering in the wind. The sounds of boots on stone, of voices, seemed to come from a great distance. Strong hands lifted me. I tried to protest, but only a weak whimper escaped my cracked lips. They bundled me in thick furs, placed me on a litter. The descent was a blur of jostling movement and gray, waking dreams where I was still on the mountain, still facing Rook's knife. I woke as I had after the river in the Royal Medical Wing, but this time the white ceiling felt like a victory. The pain was a familiar, almost welcome anchor to reality. I was alive. I had won. The senior healer, the same kind-eyed woman, shook her head with a mixture of awe and reproach as she examined my new collection of injuries. The cut on my forearm was clean and stitched. The old shoulder injury was inflamed. I was dehydrated, suffering from severe exposure and bruised in more places than she bothered to count. "You are the most stubborn patient I have ever had," she murmured, applying a salve that smelled of comfrey and honey. "And the luckiest, another hour on that peak, the trial." I rasped, "Is over. You are the victor of the blood-right trials, Alara Vane." She said it with a formality that felt strange. "The Shadowfen pack has conceded. Their champion returned to the palace just before dawn." He said nothing, but his silence was confirmation enough. A strange hollow feeling opened in my chest. Victory, it should have felt like fire, it felt like ashes. News came in fragments over the next 2 days, carried by hushed voices and meaningful glances. Thuron Blackwood had left the capital immediately after the results were confirmed. No fanfare, no farewell. He and his pack had melted back into the fens, a storm withdrawing to gather new strength. But his departure was not peace. It was a simmering, silent grudge, more dangerous than his open hostility. Lady Seraphine and the other highborn alphas had extended formal, chilly congratulations. The court was abuzz, but the buzzing had changed tone. Before, I was an oddity. Now I was a force. An unpredictable, inconvenient force that had upended the established order. The name Riverwitch was no longer just a shadowfin slur, it was whispered in the halls with a new, wary respect. Kalen did not come. His absence was a louder presence than any visit. I told myself he was king, he had a realm to stabilize after the drama of the trials. But the waiting, the silence, fed the hollow feeling. Had I been a tool that had served its purpose, a problem that had, against the odds, solved itself? On the third morning, I was able to sit up to eat some broth. The door opened, and I expected another healer. It was Commander Lyra. She stood at the foot of my bed, her military bearing unwavering, but her silver eyes held a glint I hadn't seen before. Respect. "You walk a dangerous line, girl," she said without preamble. "You have won the king a significant political victory. You have silenced the loudest voice questioning his strength. The court is in check for now." "But," I prompted, knowing one was coming. "But you have also made yourself indispensable," she said bluntly. "And indispensable people in courts either become pillars or targets for those who would topple the throne. Thuron is gone, but his resentment remains. And there are others here in this very palace who looked at you and saw a weakness. Now they look at you and see a rival. I'm not a rival, I don't want a throne." "It doesn't matter what you want," Lyra said, her voice softening slightly. "It matters what you represent. The common folk adore you. The Riverwitch who beat the high and mighty at their own game. The soldiers respect you. You have a loyalty the king hasn't inspired in years, a loyalty born of story, of shared struggle. That is power, Alara. And power unattached is a threat." Her words were a cold splash of reality. I had been so focused on surviving the mountain, I hadn't considered the political landscape I'd reshaped by simply not dying. "What does the king say?" I asked, my voice small. "The king," Lyra said, a slight, unreadable smile touching her lips, "is currently dealing with a council who suddenly has 3 different proposals for your formal title, estate, and position within the royal household. Caspian is advocating for you to be named a lady of the realm. Isolde suggests a military advisory role based on your unorthodox strategies. Others whisper you should be given a remote estate and a pension, quietly moved aside. A title, an estate, a role, more boxes, more cages." My stomach turned. "And what do you advise, Commander?" I dared to ask. She looked at me for a long moment. "I advise you to decide what you want, and to decide quickly. Because when the king finally comes to see you, and he will ask. And this time the entire kingdom will be waiting for your answer." She left me with that weight. The victory on the mountain had been simple: light the fire, don't die. The victory in the palace was a labyrinth with no clear exit. Later that afternoon, a different visitor arrived, Leora. She carried a basket of fresh bread and apples. She sat, and for a while we didn't speak. The easy silence of our old friendship was gone, but a new, more honest one had begun to take its place. "They're calling it the ascent of the common blood," she said finally, breaking an apple in half and offering me a piece. "Ballads are being written already, about the healer who faced the mountain and won." "It wasn't like that," I said, taking the apple. "It was cold and terrifying, and I mostly hid." "I know," Leora said, "but that's not the story they need. They need to believe someone like us can stand against people like them. You gave them that." She looked down at her hands. I was jealous. "I admit it, but watching you, I'm not anymore. I'm just glad you're alive, and a little afraid of what comes next for you." "So am I," I whispered. She stayed until dusk, talking of simple things: new patients in the ward, a difficult diagnosis, the petty gossip of the junior healers. It was a lifeline to the world I remembered, the world I still, desperately, wanted to be part of. When she left, the room felt emptier than ever. The victory felt like a suit of clothes 3 sizes too large, cumbersome, and ridiculous. Night fell. I lay awake, staring at the patterns of moonlight on the white ceiling. The door opened silently. I knew it was him before I turned my head. The air changed, grew charged, aware. Kalen stood just inside the room, out of the direct moonlight, a tall shadow. He was still dressed for court, but his jacket was unbuttoned, his hair slightly disheveled, as if he'd run a hand through it many times. He looked exhausted, but his eyes in the dim light were bright, intense. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, his gaze traveling over the bandages, the paleness of my face as if memorizing the cost of the victory. Finally, he moved. He didn't sit. He came to stand by the window, his back to me, looking out. "The council," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet, "is in an uproar. You have broken every expectation. They don't know what to do with you." "I don't know what to do with me either," I admitted to the darkness. He was silent for a long moment. "You could have anything now: land, title, wealth, a seat on the council if you wished it. The gratitude of a kingdom is a blank ledger. You can write any sum upon it." I pushed myself up on my elbows, wincing. "Is that what you think I want, a sum?" He turned then, his face half in shadow. "I don't know what you want, Alara. I only know what you've done. And what you've done has changed everything." He took a step toward the bed. "You asked me once why I was helping you. I said I was fascinated. That was a lie." My breath caught. "The truth is," he said, his voice dropping to a raw whisper, "from the moment I woke on that riverbank and saw you, covered in mud and blood, refusing to die beside me, I have been in awe. I have spent my life surrounded by power that is taken, demanded, inherited. Yours is given, freely, foolishly, brilliantly. It is a power that terrifies my court because they cannot buy it or threaten it or control it." He came to the edge of the bed, close enough that I could see the storm of emotion in his gray eyes, not the calm calculation of a king, but the turbulent honesty of a man. "So I will ask you again, Alara Vane, and this time the fate of this kingdom may hinge on your answer. What do you want?" The hollow feeling was gone, burned away by the heat of his gaze. The answer, when it came, was not a decision made in that moment. It was the truth that had been there all along, buried under fear and duty and politics. I met his eyes, and I did not look away. "I want to stay," I said, my voice clear and strong in the silent room. "Not for a title, not for an estate, not as a symbol or a weapon or a prize." I took a shaky breath. "I want to stay as myself, as a healer. As the person who, for some reason you find awe-inspiring, jumped into a river. I want to help this kingdom heal in whatever way I can, from the inside, on my own terms." I waited for his argument, his political reasoning, his kingly decree. Instead, Kalen Thorn, the Alpha King of Thorn's Reach, did something utterly unexpected. He smiled, a real, true, unfettered smile that reached his eyes and softened every hard line of his face. It was a smile of relief, of triumph, of profound understanding. "Good," he said, the single word filled with more meaning than any courtly speech. "Then that is what you shall do." He didn't promise me safety, he didn't promise me ease, he simply accepted my answer and in doing so acknowledged my choice, my power, my place. He turned to leave, pausing at the door. He looked back, the smile still playing on his lips. "Rest, Alara, your new terms begin tomorrow, and I suspect they will be just as complicated as the old ones." He was gone, but the room no longer felt empty. It felt alive with possibility and terror and the first, fragile seeds of a future I had chosen for myself. The river witch had won her trials, but the healer's work was just beginning, and for the first time I was not afraid of the dawn. Chapter 14, The Healer's Choice. The world after the mountain was both the same and utterly transformed. The white walls of the infirmary were familiar, but the air around me now carried a permanent charge. I was no longer just a patient, I was the victor of the blood-right trials, the River Witch. A living legend who moved among the sick and injured, her hands still skilled with bandages and poultices, but her presence now commanding a hushed reverence that made my skin crawl. My recovery was slow. The mountain had taken a toll deeper than bruises and cuts. A weariness lived in my bones, and the phantom cold of the peak seemed to have seeped into my spirit. The loud celebrations in the city, the ballads sung in taverns, felt like they were about a different person. Kalen kept his word. There was no grand ceremony bestowing a title. No lavish estate was granted. Instead, a quiet decree was posted. Ilara Vane was to be given the newly created position of Royal Medicus, with authority over the palace infirmaries and a mandate to reform healer training across the realm, focusing on battlefield triage and survival medicine, lessons hard-won on a mountainside. It was a brilliant solution. It gave me legitimacy, purpose, and a shield of royal authority without making me a noble to be resented or a lady to be married off. It was a healer's role, amplified. It was, in its way, my own terms. The first council meeting I attended in my new capacity was a study in subdued tension. Caspian the scholar adjusted his spectacles, peering at me as if I were a new, volatile chemical. Lady Seraphine offered a thin, correct smile that didn't touch her eyes. But it was Isolde who gave me a slight, genuine nod of approval from her seat. I had chosen the path of influence, not ornamentation. Commander Lyra was my most vocal supporter. The techniques she used, pressure points, endurance psychology, use of terrain, have direct applications for our scouts and frontline units, she stated bluntly, cutting off a noble who questioned the allocation of funds for my proposed wilderness medicine program. She has proven their worth against our kingdom's finest. I suggest we listen. The debate moved on, but a corner had been turned. I was no longer a problem to be solved. I was a resource to be utilized. It was not the warmth of acceptance, but it was the solid ground of utility, and I could work with that. My real work began in the infirmary. Leora, once my wary friend, became my deputy. The initial awkwardness melted under the sheer volume of work and our shared passion for healing. We pored over scrolls, argued over poultice recipes, and began drafting a new manual. The other healers, once distant, slowly began to approach me with questions, their wariness giving way to a tentative respect for my knowledge, not my fame. One afternoon, as I was instructing a group of juniors on the proper way to suture a deep wound to minimize scarring, a commotion erupted at the infirmary entrance. Guards carried in a young scout, his leg bent at a sickening angle, his face pale with shock and pain. He'd taken a fall during a training exercise in the ravines. As the senior healers bustled, preparing splints and poppy milk, I stepped forward. My presence stilled the room. I knelt beside the boy, who couldn't have been more than 17. His eyes, wide with terror, focused on my face, and recognition dawned. You're her," he gasped through clenched teeth. "I'm Ilara," I said softly, my healer's calm settling over me like a cloak. "And you're going to be fine. This will hurt, but only for a moment." As I looked at Leora, meadowfern and willow bark tincture, now, and get me the straightest branch from the cedar outside. While we waited, I talked to the boy, keeping his mind off the blinding pain. I told him about setting my brother's wrist when we were children, about the importance of keeping the mind still when the body is screaming. When the tincture had dulled the edge of his agony and the branch was ready, I guided his hands to grip the sides of the cot. "On my count," I said, my voice firm and steady. My own hands, once bandaged and torn, were now sure and strong as I took hold of his leg. 1, 2, 3. A sharp pull, a sickening click, and the bone was set. The boy cried out, then slumped in relief as the grating pain subsided. As Leora applied the splint, he looked up at me, tears of pain and gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, my lady." "Medicus," I corrected gently with a smile. "Just Medicus." It was a small moment. But as I washed my hands afterwards, I felt a peace I hadn't known since before the bridge. This was who I was. This was what I wanted. The peace was fragile. A week later, a sealed message arrived, borne by a rider covered in the dust of the northern roads. It was for Kaelin, but word of its contents slithered through the palace like a venomous snake. Thuron Blackwood was not sulking in his fens, he was rallying. Other minor packs, those who felt marginalized by the strong central rule of Thorn, were being seen crossing into Shadowfen territory. Whispers spoke of mustering forces, of grievances over hunting rights and trade tariffs being inflamed into calls for realignment. The victory on the mountain had bought time, not peace. It had shown Thuron he could not break the king's spirit through me, so now he would try to break the kingdom itself. The mood in the palace shifted again, hardening. Council meetings became strategy sessions. Commander Lyra's face was etched with new lines of worry. Kaelin was everywhere and nowhere, a whirlwind of planning and diplomacy, his face once again the unreadable mask of the king. The easy camaraderie we'd found in the quiet after the trials vanished, replaced by the grim reality of impending conflict. He summoned me to the map room one evening. The great table was covered not in maps of healing herbs, but in troop deployments and supply lines. He looked up as I entered, his eyes weary. "It begins," he said simply. "Thuron moves to isolate us, to cut off northern trade. He is betting on a long, draining conflict, hoping other packs will see weakness and join him. What can I do?" I asked, the old feeling of being a pawn returning. He pointed to a spot on the map. "The valley town of Oakhaven, it's a key crossroads. If Shadowfen takes it, they split the kingdom. I am sending a garrison to reinforce it, and I am sending you." I stared at him. "Me, I'm a healer, not a soldier." "Exactly," he said, coming around the table. "Oakhaven's people are terrified. They've heard the rumors of Shadowfen's brutality. Sending soldiers tells them I will fight for them. Sending you tells them I will heal them. You are a symbol of resilience, Alara, of the kingdom's heart. Your presence will do as much to bolster their spirit as 100 guards." It was a different kind of trial, not of strength or will, but of faith. He was asking me to be the living emblem of the hope I supposedly represented. "It could be dangerous," I said. "If Thuron learns I'm there, he will see it as a provocation or a vulnerability." Kaelin's gaze was stark. "That is the risk. But I believe it is a necessary one, and you will not be undefended. Lyra is assigning her most trusted lieutenant, Gareth, to command the garrison. Your safety will be his primary mission." He was not asking, he was, as king, deciding. But his eyes held a question, a plea for my understanding, my consent. I thought of the boy with the broken leg, of the hope in his eyes when he recognized me. I thought of the kingdom that had woven a story around me, a story of a commoner who stood against the storm. They needed that story to be true now more than ever. "I'll go," I said. He nodded, a muscle working in his jaw. "Prepare your medical supplies. You leave at first light." As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. "Alara," I looked back, "what you said you wanted, to heal the kingdom from the inside." He gestured to the map, to the looming conflict. "This is what it looks like. It is not clean, it is not safe. It is politics and blood and fear. Is it still what you want?" I met his stormy eyes across the room, filled with the plans for war. The healer in me recoiled from the violence. The girl from the river wanted to hide, but the woman who had faced the mountain, who had chosen to stay, knew the answer. "Yes," I said, my voice unwavering. "It is, because healing sometimes meant standing between the wound and the blade." And I had already proven I knew how to stand. Oakhaven awaited, not as a retreat, but as the next front line. The Riverwitch's trials were over. The Medicus's work had just taken a deadly, necessary turn. Chapter 15, The Heart of Oakhaven. The journey to Oakhaven was a silent, grim procession. 50 royal guards in polished mail, their faces set, surrounded a supply wagon and my smaller healer's cart. At their head rode Gareth, lieutenant to Commander Lyra, a man of few words and watchful eyes who reminded me of a well-honed blade. He had nodded to me once, a gesture of professional acknowledgement, and then his attention had never left the forested hills around us. The The further north we traveled, the more the land seemed to hold its breath. Villages we passed were too quiet, fields were half-tended. The fear was a scent on the wind, sharper than pine. Oakhaven, when we finally saw it nestled in its green valley, was a town braced for a blow. The wooden palisade was newly reinforced, but it looked fragile against the brooding shadows of the blackwood forest that crowded the northern ridge Shadowfen territory. People stopped in the muddy streets to watch our column enter, their expressions a mixture of desperate hope and deep-seated anxiety. Gareth set up his command in the town's sturdy long hall. I turned the town's modest shrine with its single large room and hearth into a temporary infirmary. Leora had stayed at the palace. My role was symbolic and strategic. Hers was to continue our real work. I was assisted by Oakhaven's own elderly healer, Mara, a woman with hands knotted by arthritis but eyes that missed nothing. The first days were a blur of organization and uneasy calm. I trained townsfolk in basic wound care and sanitation. I inspected water sources. I spoke with mothers and farmers, my plain dress and direct manner slowly eroding their awe of the river witch. To them, I became simply Medicus Vane, the king's healer who had come to help, but the shadow of the forest was always there. Gareth's scouts reported increased Shadowfen patrols along the tree line. Tensions crackled like static before a storm. I saw the fear in the eyes of the guards, young men who had never seen true battle. One evening, a commotion at the gate shattered the tense peace. Gareth's scouts returned, carrying one of their own, Eric, a young man with an arrow buried deep in his thigh. They'd been ambushed by Shadowfen skirmishers barely a mile into the forest. The infirmary became a scene of controlled chaos. Mara boiled water. I laid out my tools. The arrow was a brutal, barbed hunting head. It had to come out, but pulling it would tear the leg to pieces. "Hold him," I ordered, my voice calm as I selected a fine, sharp scalpel from my kit. My own heart was a drum, but my hands were steady. This was my terrain, this was the work. I didn't just cut, I explained, for the benefit of the pale-faced townsfolk helping. The barbs are here and here. We must widen the wound around them to allow a clean exit. It was grisly, precise work. Eric bit down on a leather strap, his screams muffled. Sweat dripped from my brow. Finally, with a sickening, wet slide, the arrow came free, followed by a gush of blood. I staunched it, cleaned the ravaged flesh with distilled spirits that made Eric arch in agony, then packed and stitched the wound with meticulous, tiny stitches to minimize scarring. When it was done, I was covered in his blood, and he was unconscious, pale but breathing steadily. The townsfolk who had watched looked at me with new eyes, not the eyes of legend, but the eyes of people who had seen a terrible, necessary skill wielded with compassion. The river witch had saved a life, not with magic, but with grim, bloody science. Gareth found me later, washing my hands in a basin, the water pink. "That was impressive," he said, his usual stoicism cracked by a sliver of respect. "The men will fight harder knowing you're here." "I'd rather they didn't have to fight at all," I replied, my voice tired. "Thuron doesn't give us that choice." He nodded toward the north. "He's testing us. That arrow was a message. He knows you're here." A cold certainty settled in my stomach. Thuron wasn't just after the town. My presence had made Oakhaven a symbol. Taking it and capturing or killing me would be a blow to the kingdom's morale from which it might not recover. 2 nights later, the attack came. It began not with a roar, but with a whisper, the soft thwap of arrows finding the sentries on the palisade. Then a chorus of guttural war cries erupted from the tree line as shadows became men, streaming toward the walls. Torches flew, lighting thatched roofs. Oakhaven was plunged into a nightmare of fire, steel, and screaming. I was in the infirmary when the alarm bells clanged. Mara herded the children and elderly into the root cellar. I stood at the door, watching the hellish orange light dance on the walls of the buildings opposite. My healer's kit was ready. My heart hammered not with the old, blind terror of the river, but with a focused, ferocious purpose. The first wounded staggered in, a townsman with a gash on his arm, a guard clutching a bleeding side. I worked, tying tourniquets, stitching, my movements automatic, my mind clear. The sounds of battle were a distant storm. This was my battle. Then Gareth himself half carried, half dragged a guard through the door. The young man's tunic was soaked in blood from a deep abdominal wound. His eyes were already glazing. It was a death sentence on any battlefield. "Can you save him?" Gareth grunted, his own arm bleeding from a sword slice. I looked at the wound, at the pale, young face. I thought of the mountain, of the choice to fight. I met Gareth's eyes. "I can try. Hold the door, buy me time." He nodded, a soldier's understanding passing between us, and went back into the fray. What followed was the most intense, desperate hour of my life. It was a brutal, intimate war against death. I had to reach inside, to clamp off bleeding vessels Mara didn't know existed, to clean out filth, to suture torn organs. I used every ounce of knowledge, every trick Kaelin and Lyra had taught me about endurance, every scrap of will I had forged on the summit. I was not just a healer, I was a general on a battlefield of flesh and blood. When I finally tied the last stitch and sat back, my hands trembling, my apron a scarlet ruin, the young guard was still breathing. Shallow but steady, he was alive. The sounds outside had changed. The war cries had diminished, replaced by the moans of the wounded and the crackle of dying fires. Dawn was a gray smear through the smoke. Gareth appeared in the doorway, his face smeared with soot and blood, but his eyes alive with a hard-won triumph. "They're broken," falling back to the tree line. We held, the words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my exhaustion. I stumbled out of the shrine into the ash-choked morning. Oakhaven was battered, scarred, but it stood. Townsfolk and soldiers alike moved through the wreckage, tending to the wounded, dousing embers, and as they saw me, covered in the blood of their friends and brothers, something passed through them. A ripple, not a cheer, something deeper. They nodded, they touched their brows, they made way for me. I walked to the palisade, climbing the shaky ladder to the walkway. To the north, the blackwood forest stood, dark and silent. The Shadowfen army was gone for now. But they would be back. Gareth joined me, gazing at the forest. He wanted a quick, demoralizing victory. You denied him that. You gave these people more than medicine today, Medicus. You gave them a spine. I didn't feel like I'd given anything. I felt emptied out. But as I looked down at the wounded but unbowed town, at the guards who stood a little taller, I understood. This was the healing Kaelin had spoken of. It was messy, it was painful, it was etched in blood and fire, it was real. A rider came from the south later that day, carrying a sealed message from the king. It was short. "Oakhaven stands, the kingdom hears its heart beating, you have my thanks and its hold the line." I folded the parchment, the simple words a balm. He wasn't here, but he saw, he understood. That night, as a cold moon rose over the scarred valley, I stood once more on the palisade. The fear was still there. The shadow of Thuron Blackwood still loomed. The war was not over. But I was not the girl from the river anymore, drowning in a destiny she didn't choose. I was not the pawn on the council table or the champion on the mountain. I was Ilara Vane, Royal Medicus, the healer of Oakhaven. I had jumped into the river to save a king, and in doing so had found a kingdom to save. The path ahead was dark and hard and paved with uncertainty. But for the first time I walked it not as a victim of fate, but as its defiant, weary, determined architect. The bridge had collapsed, the river had tried to claim me, the court had sought to use me, the mountain had sought to break me. The forest had sought to burn me, and I had endured. I looked north toward the darkness and I felt no terror, only a quiet, unshakable resolve. Let the storm come. I had already learned how to stand in the heart of it. The story of the girl who dragged the Alpha King from a sinking carriage was over. The story of the woman who would help him hold a kingdom was just beginning. Like, subscribe and comment for part 2.